still be speaking statistically, rambling romantically, pontificating pedantically, bantering bodily, drafting discerningly, giggling giddily, equaling effectively wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2450 of Effectively Wild, a FanGraphs baseball podcast brought to you by our Patreon supporters. I'm Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, and I'm joined by Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. Ben, how are you?
Doing well, enjoying some WBC action.
Yeah.
Lots of exciting stuff going on here. U.S., Japan, DR, the three favorites, a combined 10-0 as we speak here on Tuesday afternoon. Venezuela and Puerto Rico also undefeated, as is Italy. Italy, too. Those espresso shots in the dugout doing the trick. So lots of fireworks, some on the field, some said by Randy Arozarena, directed in the general vicinity of Cal Raleigh. You worried? You worried
boys,
about things in the clubhouse over there?
No, not
what's happening
especially. I am not particularly concerned.
Yeah.
I do think that you guys are being dopes, and you should stop being a dope. You know, you should, when presented with the opportunity to be a dope or shake your teammate's hand, you can just shake his hand, and then when he's a little rude to you, hey, that sucks. Don't be a little rude, but also you don't have to be rude and kind. I think it's fine. I mean, it's not great.
It's not fine. Maybe it'll be fine.
I think it'll be fine. I think it'll be fine. It is a weird, it's a weird part of the WBC where you have teammates who become rivals temporarily. And if it were me, I would simply be like, hey, bud, how's it going? I do a little blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Smooth the way. You know, because it's not an unprecedented thing for a hitter and a catcher to have a little like, hey, how's it going, bud?
No, not at all.
It's normal. It suggests a level of, I don't even know what the right word is, Ben. I don't think I mean jingoism in this particular circumstance, but it's just like you can just step up your buddy, and I do want to be mindful of, you're speaking through an interpreter. And so there's the part of it that is, and he was kind of smirking, and he wished Cal's parents well. So that was funny. Mostly, what a weird, funny little time,
It is very strange. Yeah. This is when we were talking about possible unwritten rules, flare-ups surrounding the challenge system. I was saying, I don't discount baseball players' ability to find some sort of struggle, some strife in the most mundane interactions. And this is another example. And for those who have missed this drama, there may have been further developments after we record this. But as we are speaking here, so Randy, who is a Seattle Mariner, but is also playing in the WBC and was playing against Cal Raleigh and Team USA in the USA-Mexico game, he went to shake the hand of Cal Raleigh when he walked to the plate, just show a little bonhomie, a little, friendly greet your teammate. Yeah. And Cal was not having it. He did not take the outstretched hand, and there were some words said. Cal said something to Arozarena, and Arozarena seemed to nod and accept whatever it was, and they went about their business. And then after the game, Cal did not comment on that interaction. I think he was seen striding towards the visitors' clubhouse. I don't know if they talked about this afterward, but Randy was asked about this. And yes, it is translated. I mean, he is on camera saying it in Spanish, and the words themselves, I don't think a lot was lost in translation. No. I know that there were people who were speculating, is this a joke? Just because it seems so strange. It's like, is this a work of some sort? Like, is this genuine discord? And he didn't really leave a lot to the imagination. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. He was mostly straight-faced, I would say. So watching this, I would not have thought, oh, this is all one big joke. But yeah, he didn't really mince words. He said in several ways, essentially, screw that guy, And we'll link to the full translation and the video itself if you want to hear it right from Randy's mouth here. Right. But yeah, he sounded like not a big fan of Cal, at least at this moment, and told him to go to hell, screw off in so many words in multiple languages. And at the end left him with that fake ass good to see you he hit me with. He can shove it straight up his ass. I'm out. Of course, he said that in Spanish, and then he walked away. So that's the last we've heard. And I imagine that they both may address it after we speak today. But Mariners teammates have been tiptoeing around it in Mariners camp, of course. And even Mariners manager, he talked about it, Dan Wilson, and he at first feigned that he didn't know what he was being asked about. But then he essentially said what you said, which is that I don't think it'll be an issue long term. Of course, what else is he going to say? And he hadn't talked to either of them yet. So he didn't really know that much more than we do. So it's a weird one. Yeah. And you wonder if there's other history there, if there are previous interactions between these two, because it would be somewhat abrupt for this to be the only thing that had touched off what Arozarena ranted about. But there's history of this sort of thing.
Yes.
So Mark DeRosa, who's the manager of Team USA, he made clear that there's no team policy about this, that they haven't said you can't be friendly toward
Smith
opponents.
Also declined to shake Randy's hand, right?
Yes, in a previous WBC, right? This is
it wasn't this WBC. I guess they would. Of course, it wouldn't have been this.
This is all
WBC
will all happen again. But DeRosa said that there's no policy against fraternizing with opponents. He said, to be honest, when it happened on the bench, we were like, oof, okay. And they're teammates. So he's not really doing anything to downplay this.
There also was a moment, I'll let you get back to what he was saying, but there was a moment on the broadcast of that game where, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm not remembering the exact circumstances that sort of preceded this stand-up, but they basically did no, we are fun, you know? Ken's up there being like, Team USA's heard you say that they're not fun. We're fun, you know? We're a lighthearted group. And I'm like, I don't know. You guys seem very serious. You should shut out a little bit.
I know.
Please.
Yeah. And it was 2023, the Will Smith and Arozarena incident. And at the time, Arozarena said, he left me hanging, but I'm not going to cry. I kept going and hit 2 doubles. And it has happened, though, in this WBC with other players and teams. Because
with the Australians.
Yes, Robbie Perkins of Team Australia declined to shake hands with Milan Prokop, who was the Czech leadoff man. Apologies for possible mispronunciations there. And he stuck out his hand, the batter, and Perkins declined it too and said, there's no malice. We're out there competing. Once we get on the field, we're out there to beat them. That's all it is. So on the one hand, I suppose it speaks to how seriously players are taking the WBC, which I like to see that. I like to see that they care. And you can tell. Tarek Skubal had a long, dark night of the soul, did some agonizing, did some soul searching after his lone start for Team USA. He was deciding, actually, do I want to keep going? And then ultimately decided, no, I'm going to go back to Tigers camp as previously agreed to. But it clearly pained him to do that. And you could see how much Paul Skeens was into things and the way he was looking at Bobby Witt Jr. with eyes that he's previously only reserved for Livy Dunn. I mean, these guys care, and that's good because I think that helps us as fans, as spectators, buy into it. If they're treating it like it matters, then we treat it like it matters. But also, it's your teammates. Just wants to shake hands, in the spirit of sportsmanship or something. I don't see an issue with that.
Come on, buddy.
I have talked before about how I do have a semi-old school attitude toward this. I don't think that there needs to be any strict no fraternization policy.
We think they need to enforce the rule that's literally in the rule book?
Yeah, because all these guys are buddies. They're literally in the same union. They're members of a fraternity. They've all played with each other, against each other, et cetera. So it's sort of silly to pretend that there's no friendship here. Right. But also there are times, and I've said as much, when during a game, I feel like if it's a tense game and it's high stakes or there's really something riding on the outcome, and then you do see guys just kind of palling around and joking. And it does almost detract, especially if there's some sort of historical rivalry between those teams. Like, I just want you to kind of keep kayfabe in a wrestling sense. You don't have to be out there like baring your teeth at each other, but just saying, kind of maintain the facade of like, we're opponents, we're competitors, we're actually going against each other here. So, sometimes I have seen, it kind of crosses a line for players on the team and they get upset about, say, teammates being too buddy-buddy with opponents or something. But even for me as a fan, as someone watching, it just kind of takes me out of it a little bit if like, you're sitting on the edge of your seat and meanwhile it's like, guys are just joking around at second base or something. I'm always fine with some banter at first base, love that tradition. Someone gets on base and you have a talkative first baseman chatting him up, etc. But there's a certain amount of that I don't mind being reined in a bit temporarily. But I don't think just a greeting, a handshake, a cordial, hey, we're teammates most of the time, but today we're competitors, so best of luck to you, sir. I think that's perfectly fine. That doesn't diminish the sense of competition whatsoever.
I agree. I think Cal's being a little silly. I hope we come to learn that they have made up and kissed if they want to, and that all is well. I also think that, like, on the one hand, sure, it stands out more because they are teammates in the major league context. But as an aside, I think if someone who isn't your teammate comes up and is like, hey, respectful handshake, acknowledging you, a terrific player, also fine to return that handshake if that's the first time you've ever met them in your whole entire life,
Agreed. Yeah.
I just think a little, come on, Cal. And like Randy, what can I say? Randy seems like an odd person. He seems like a person who has some odd traits to him. And so I think some of this is just like Randy being Randy in terms of the precise delivery of it. But a little odd, but also Cal. Come on, buddy. Come on.
Yeah. Would be quite a twist if they did decide that they wanted to kiss after not even being willing to do this minimum amount of PDA. That would be almost trying too hard to say, oh no, there's no bad blood here. Not only are we okay with each other, we're smooching.
They can do a very manly pat on the back, very like pat, manly.
They could bro hug or something. But
bro hug.
I assume that they will walk this back and play it down in some way when they are asked about it. Yeah. And I'll update that if necessary. But you do always wonder, will that bad blood linger? Even if they kind of put a good face on it and say it's not an issue. It's just, I mean, I would take it as a bit of an affront if I were Randy, but then also if I were Cal, seeing that Randy rant, being like, whoa. That was that escalated quickly.
Yeah,
so
kind of a lot.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot happening here. This is I guess the joys of international competition.
Yeah. But I will say Randy seems to have a ton of affection for Cal's parents.
Yes, that's true.
It can't go. I think it can be too bad, right? It's like, you think that Randy's like texting Cal's mom being like, hey, tell your son to straighten up.
Maybe that's how they patch things up. They use Cal's parents as the intermediaries or something. But that was how he began.
Right. I have
the only thing he should be thankful for is having such great parents. He's very well educated. Thank God. I was lucky enough to see them a few days ago at the hotel. They came over to greet me, gave me a big hug, and were genuinely proud to see me. So that was interesting. Is that also sort of a slight? It's like his parents were hugging me and he won't even shake my hands. I don't even know how to read the layers of subtext here, although a lot of it was just pure text. But
right. This is what I'm saying. And I don't mean to imply that he was like misinterpreted or what have you. And you're right. We have the whole thing on video. But I wonder if there is something that is getting a little lost here, because it's just an odd, the way it's expressed is a bit odd.
Yes, or at least some history, some backstory of some sort.
Anyway, Mariners, hey, focus up, you guys. Focus up.
So we can't ask Divish about that because we've already done our Mariners preview. And we won't talk about the Jesus Luzardo extension today because we're going to be talking Phillies later this week.
We are.
And we don't have to talk about the latest Atlanta Braves pitching injury, Joey Wentz, this time because we're going to be talking about the Braves later this week. And, I guess we have already covered the Reds, and I already fretted and wrung my hands about Hunter Green. And sure enough, he's out for at least a few months with surgery to remove bone chips.
And loose bodies.
Loose bodies. Got to get those loose bodies out of there. Yeah. But I remember Trent saying that probably the rotation logjam would work itself out one way or another.
I tend to.
And yeah, that's happening. You can never have enough pitching. But we will be previewing two teams today with two athletic writers. We'll be talking, well, look, I don't know if they're athletic, but they are writers for The Athletic. Tim Britton will be joining us to talk about the Mets, followed by Spencer Nussbaum on the Nationals. And if you're worrying about what this means and the projections and the order of previews, never fear, we are going a little out of order. This was actually supposed to be the day for the Phillies and Angels preview, but just for scheduling conflict reasons and availability of guests, we're pushing that to next time, and we're doing Mets and Nats today. Ultimately, it doesn't matter that much. We're going to get to all 30, I promise. But a couple of WBC issues that have come up not related to Randy or Raleigh. We got a few questions on the same subject. And when our mailbox just starts pinging and we get 3 or 4 emails on exactly the same subject in quick succession, you know that something has touched a nerve for the Effectively Wild listener base. And I don't know, I guess I'll read a few of these. So we got questions about the mercy-rule-inducing home run. So Nick, Patreon supporter, said, I just read the ESPN headline that Soto's homer forces run rule victory for Dominican Republic. So this was the DR's 12-1 victory over the Netherlands. And Nick says, my immediate thought was, isn't that a walk-off? It's a walk-off in the sense that the offense scored a run in order to immediately win the game. However, pummeling your opponent by 11 runs doesn't necessarily seem like the same cause for celebration as a true walk-off. So my question is, do you consider a run rule victory a walk-off, or is it something else entirely? And then we got a question from Rory who said, while watching Panama, Canada on the ticker, they had the stats from the DR game, which had the following: Soto, 1 for 3, mercy rule inducing 2-run homer in the 7th inning. Yes, it is literally what happened, but I think there should be a shorthand name for this. I would go with a stomp-off home run, which is a play on walk-off, obviously, and stomping is more aggressive and demonstrative than walking. And then the last one of these I'll read comes from Shaul, who says the WBC had its first true walk-off. However, they also have a mercy rule. Is it a walk-off if a team scores enough to activate the mercy rule? Technically, they did score a run in that instance, which seals the game. Or does a walk-off imply that it's the end of the game and without scoring, a team would lose if it was trailing, or regulation would end, or there would be more extra innings if the score were to hold? So yes, there was the actual walk-off, which was the first classic traditional walk-off in the WBC, although there was some confusion because the announcer seemed not to know immediately that the game was over and referred to the team taking a lead and then kind of tried to cover for it, seemingly. So that wasn't the smoothest walk-off call. But yeah, that was an exciting ending. That was Ozzy Albies in the Netherlands-Nicaragua game, right? Yeah. So many games in such a short span of time. It's hard to keep them straight. Lots of exciting stuff. But that's the question. Does this count as a walk-off if you hit a homer to trigger the mercy rule and end the game?
My answer is, I think technically yes, but it wouldn't be the way I would refer to it if it were me in the booth. It's like a subtype of a walk-off that if you describe it in the terms of what is actually ending the game, which is the mercy rule, I think is more descriptive. I think it tells you more about the circumstance that ends the game. I haven't been warming up, so I can't do like an excited rendering of that home run. Sorry. But, it would be something along the lines of like, and he, hits a 3-run shot to mercy rule like that. Isn't that so compelling? You're like, wow, you really transported me, Meg. I'm in it. It's like I'm there. It's like we've gone back in time and traveled through space. It's like that.
Yes, I felt the excitement there. But really, you shouldn't feel...
Thank you for yes-anding me in that moment.
You shouldn't feel that much excitement in that moment because it's not that exciting. Yes, the game is over, but it's, for all intents and purposes, over already, which is why you have a mercy rule.
Exactly. The home run is exciting, and winning the game is exciting. Lingering on mercy ruling another team is unseemly. So it's a tricky thing. That's a hard needle to thread because you want to be amped about winning, but you just embarrassed professionals. Well, at least some of them are professional baseball players. And so you want to keep the excitement about you and the home run and the win and less about the mercy ruling, because I think that, people feel bad about that. So it's a tricky thing, but mercy ruling is more descriptive. It paints a better picture than saying a walk-off, because, most people's context for a walk-off is a completely different game state than the mercy rule describes, right? Because most of the time when you're walking off, when you've hit a walk-off, you're either tired or behind. So there's tension, to your point, right? There's all this, there's tension. Otherwise, it's not a walk-off. You just don't play that half of the inning, right? So you gotta focus on the mercy rule part, because that describes the game state, I think, more specifically. Although there is tension in the WBC context, I suppose, because mercy ruling a team is, well, it's embarrassing for them, but it's advantageous for you from a pitcher use perspective. So you could be excited about that, right? That you're preserving your arms, I
think so. Generally, Dennis Eckersley gets credit for coining the term walk-off, although I think he originally referred to it as a walk-off piece. And he was referring specifically to home runs and also to the closer, to the guy who just gave up that home run, who's now dejectedly Charlie Brown walking off the field because they just lost the game. And gradually it's evolved, as a lot of terms do. And sometimes you even hear it applied to other sports, but it's also long since migrated to other ways to end a game. It doesn't have to be a home run anymore.
It doesn't have to be a home run.
Yeah, there's maybe been a bit of walk-off creep. Some people think we use the term too liberally, and so probably would not want it extended to yet another game-ending scenario.
What are the circumstances where people use it where it's not a walk-off?
It is, I think. It's just, some people think it should be reserved for
like home runs.
Yeah, basically. Okay. Yeah. And probably, I think by the Eckersley definition, or just by the letter of the term, I think it applies to the mercy rule ending, because you are dejectedly walking off. The game is over. So it fits technically, but this isn't something we're going to have to worry about all that often, unless Rob Manfred decides to add a mercy rule to MLB or something.
Excited about college baseball.
Maybe, yeah. And we've talked about the advisability of a mercy rule, and is it better to just have something like that instead of going through the charade of position player pitchers or whatever. Right. But as long as this is not a Major League Baseball phenomenon, we probably will not have to consider this question all that often. But yeah, I probably wouldn't say it unless I were kind of joking about how it was a walk-off technically, but didn't really feel like one. I don't mind stomp off. Stomp off's not bad, because it does illustrate that this was a real pounding. Like, this was a drubbing, we stomped you. We didn't just beat you. It wasn't a close game. We just ran roughshod over you. So stomp off kind of works, I guess.
I know, but it feels so mean, you know? Like, I like mercy rule because it suggests, an extension of grace toward the bums who can't score runs.
Yeah. I don't have a problem really for mercy rule inducing. It's wordy, obviously, to have to say, right? It's a mercy rule inducing dinger or something. I don't know. That doesn't really roll right off the tongue, but how often do you have to say it? So if there is more common parlance for this in college or any other level, or Little League for that matter, or wherever a mercy rule happens more often, then by all means, do let us know if something has taken hold that we could substitute here. But given how rarely we have to consider this question, I don't mind saying mercy rule inducing home run. It's okay.
I have a Cal update.
Okay.
Cal Raleigh, via FaceTime just now, said he reached out to Randy Arozarena as well as Dan Wilson after last night's exchange at the World Baseball Classic in Houston. This is coming from Daniel Kramer. There's no beef. I love Randy. Like I said, when we're back in Seattle, he's my brother. He's family. I think I would like to hear from Randy.
Yes, it seemed like there was a bit of beef. They were the Beef Boys briefly, at least for a little while there.
But I suspect I remain steadfast in my belief that this will probably be
it'll blow
okay.
over, I'm sure.
May I offer a tiny bit of feedback to Team USA?
Sure.
Guys, chill out a little bit, I think. Like, Ben, I know you have other stuff, but and I understand Skeens was pitching, and then Griffin Jacks was pitching. I feel like there's a lot of military talk on that broadcast last night, man. Like more than usual, even, and we have a good amount on a normal night, situation like that. So it's just like everybody, you could just talk more about Bobby. Talk more about Bobby Wood Jr., man. I don't know if you know this. He's a pretty good baseball player.
He is. He's quite good. I think I referred to him as a perfect player, in fact, recently on the podcast. But it is nice because he does tend to get overshadowed by Judge and Ohtani because they are so great.
Not last night.
No, not last night. Yeah.
Not last night. All right.
He's pretty special too. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty special.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And one other WBC thing, we got an email about this, and I probably should have done a deeper dive into the rules, but this is interesting. This is also about game endings. This comes to us from Connor, who says, with Korea securing their spot in the WBC quarters with a 7-2 victory, needing to win by 5 and allow no more than 2 runs, what would have happened if Korea was the home team in this game and entered the bottom of the 9th with a 6-2 lead, still needing 1 run to qualify for the quarters? Could they have elected to bat? MLB has this to say about regulation games. If not terminated early, regulation games last until the trailing team has had the chance to make 27 outs, 9 innings. If the home team is leading after the visiting team has made 3 outs in the top of the 9th inning, the home team wins and does not have to come to bat in the bottom of the 9th. As pedantic experts, does not have to imply that they can if they want to? Is there a world where a manager refuses to leave the dugout because they haven't won enough yet? If the umpire tries to call the game, could the home team theoretically just stand in the batter's box and refuse to leave until a pitch is thrown? There's no explicit definition of a regulation game from the WBC listed on the MLB website, so I assume they rely on MLB rules to determine this. Some extra curiosity, if this elective 9th inning exists in the MLB rulebook, why don't we see it for milestone chasing? Could a team up by 10 runs force the opposition to keep pitching just so a player can try for a cycle for their 3,000th hit? Or would the league step in to prevent what would essentially be sanctioned stat padding? I can't tell you that there were instances early in Major League history where they did play what we would now consider to be unnecessary bottoms of the 9th.
Yeah.
They just hadn't developed the convention that if you were winning, you didn't have to finish out the game. So they did have the home team that was winning just play and potentially run up the score. So that has happened in Major League history. It hasn't happened for a very long time. And until 1950 or so, the home team could choose whether it wanted last licks or first licks, though the home team choosing to bat first was pretty rare by the time the 20th century rolled around. I did look up the history of what we would consider unnecessary bottoms of the 9th, though, in the indispensable A Game of Inches, a book by Peter Morris that documents how just about everything in baseball came to be. And he writes, once it was established that a game was to last 9 innings, the requirement was taken literally. If the club batting last was ahead after 8.5 innings, it wouldn't have occurred to early players not to complete the game. After all, a baseball match was a ceremony rather than a competition, and for the losers to walk off the field would be the ultimate act of poor sportsmanship. This custom of completing the game persisted throughout the increasingly competitive 1870s, while many other gentlemanly traditions died out. Before the 1874 season, a proposal was made to end play after 8.5 innings if the outcome was decided, but the idea was discussed somewhat unfavorably and voted down. Nor was it simply a case of going through the motions in the bottom of the ninth. In many cases, a side that had already won piled up many additional runs against demoralized opponents. There was an 1879 instance in a tournament where the trailing team glumly walked off the field before the bottom of the ninth, and the umpire ruled the game a 9-0 forfeit. The newspapers criticized the club for the breach of etiquette. More important, their action in walking off the field helped to pave the way for the walk-off hit. This and similar incidents made it obvious that a custom once designed to promote good sportsmanship was instead creating ill will. The rule was finally changed that offseason, so if the side at bat in the ninth inning secure the winning run, the game is to be called without putting out 3 men as heretofore. So the first sudden death victory in Major League history took place on opening day of the National League's 1880 season. But this is an interesting one just because we are dealing with rules that are somewhat separate from MLB rules. And yeah, if a run differential comes into play or determines whether you advance in this tournament, then you do actually have some incentive to play on if they let you.
Yeah. I feel like since run differential is a potential determinant of advancement, it feels like they should let you, right?
I guess, except...
but maybe not. I had a headache earlier and I feel so discombobulated by podcasting right now. Can you tell?
I think you could make that case, but then also you could say, well, it's convention not to play the bottom of the ninth if you're winning and you're the home team. So therefore, the run differential is just what you have before that point, and you can't make an exception for you to just keep playing if you want to, because maybe an opponent could have done the same in a game and they didn't because they didn't know that they needed to or something. Yeah.
Plus, like, you're making the other team use pitching, and in an event like this where there's such strict rules around pitching usage, that feels a little rude, Yeah.
Also, in the current MLB rule book, there is a rule I'm reading right now, Rule 7.01G. The score of a regulation game is the total number of runs scored by each run at the moment the game ends. I love when rule books have to define, like, what's the score? Or how do you tell who won? Oh, the team that had more runs when the game ends. And how do you know when the game ends? Well, Rule 7.01G parentheses 1 says the game ends when the visiting team completes its half of the ninth inning if the home team is ahead. And then it goes on to say the game ends when the ninth inning is completed if the visiting team is ahead. If the home team scores the winning run in its half of the ninth inning or its half of an extra inning after a tie, the game ends immediately when the winning run is scored. So I'm reading that and interpreting that to say that you can't voluntarily decide or unilaterally decide to play the bottom of the ninth if you are the home team and you are winning, because it says the game ends when the visiting team completes its half of the ninth if the home team is ahead. So, yeah, I do believe that has been the rule for a while, and presumably that also applies to the WBC. So I don't think you could just choose and say, hey, not so fast, get back out here. We want to play the bottom of the ninth too. But I think that would be a little unfair in that scenario when one team knows that, okay, yeah, we actually have to keep playing to juice our total here, and other teams did not know that prior to that situation.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that's right. That hangs together. Yep.
I mean, in spring training, the rules are relaxed, and you have, pitchers who are removed from the game who can come back in because they just got to get their work in and whatever. And so there was a game in spring training in 2023 when the Orioles and Pirates played the bottom of the ninth, even though the game should have ended because the Orioles wanted to get some work for a pitcher and the Pirates were fine with it. And evidently the league was fine with it too, but the crew chief wasn't. So the umpires just left, and Orioles catcher Maverick Handley called balls and strikes. So if something similar were to happen in a real game for some reason, probably the umps would just walk off the field, everyone would leave, and it'd be like, nope, we're done. But also I think that is what the rules dictate at this point. All right.
I mean, you can roll innings in spring. It's wild out there.
It's spring training for everyone. So love the WBC for all of these scenarios that it forces us or encourages us to consider that we would not normally. And speaking of the league preventing teams from doing something, I did a little outro rant on the last episode of last week, because after we recorded, it was reported that the Brewers had debuted a system for signaling to their batters when it was acceptable to challenge.
Yeah.
And they had big cards and everything, like green and red cards that they would hang on the dugout. And it was prior to the pitches. It wasn't after the pitch because, you can't consult with the dugout deciding whether to challenge. There's no time to, but also you're not allowed to.
Right.
But the Brewers were trying to semi get around that by prior to the pitch just saying, hey, if this is a questionable call, this is a situation where you're allowed to challenge.
Right.
And I was somewhat dismayed by that just because it felt like another example of the coaching encroaching into the players' decisions. And as I acknowledge, this is not that different from just the regular signs and signals that are passed to a batter before the pitch. Like, the batter still has to decide whether to swing. The batter would still have to decide whether to challenge. But it still felt like one of the things I had celebrated about the challenge system is that it did preserve player agency, and they were the ones on the spot who had to make the call. And so to even slightly take that out of their hands in this sort of formal, a lot of it was just the cards probably that bothered me, just card creep. We've got the positioning cards. We've got the catcher cards. Everyone's got cards. Pitchers have had cards. So another giant card I didn't love. And to my surprise, actually, MLB has stepped in and banned the Brewers and anyone from doing this. They've said that you're not allowed to, that it's against the spirit of the challenge system rules, which I was kind of heartened by, actually. Yeah. And I don't know exactly where they'll draw the line, if it's just about the cards. Like, what if someone yells over there? Or what if it's just a signal that they pass as they're passing, take or swing or whatever, right? Like, how do you police that? And would you even want to? Is it just about the visual and this being kind of glaring and obtrusive? And maybe that's all it is, and teams will find some other way to convey this to batters in real time. But, I have to hand it to MLB, I think, for stepping in and saying we want to draw the line somewhere, and we don't want all of this to be dictated and for it to be on cards. And so I'm kind of encouraged by that.
It seemed like such an obvious violation of the spirit of the rule that I was maybe a little less surprised than you were that they would intervene, but I'm glad that they did, Yeah.
Okay. Well, kudos. We'll see whether teams keep trying to push the envelope there and find ways around this. And, other than just coaching up their players prior to the game, between innings, which is completely acceptable. Give them all the info, give them the ground rules, but in that moment, let them make the call. So I'm glad that was preserved to some extent. Also, we got an email which I think anticipated a column that subsequently appeared at The Athletic by Britt Rowley. We got a question from Ethan in Minneapolis who asked about contract nullification for players with PD suspensions. And Ethan asked, a thought came to me in the aftermath of the Jurickson Profar suspension. If a player receives a PD suspension, should the team have the option to nullify that player's contract? Ethan says, the way I see it, a PED suspension not only affects the 80 or 162 games a player misses, it also complicates a team's roster construction, calls into question the validity of the player's past performance on which the contract was signed, and hurts the marketability of the player. Additionally, the lost time means the player may be rusty when they come back from the suspension. Surely the Braves would be interested in nullifying Profar's contract, and I don't think anyone would blame them for it. Putting the performance-enhancing component aside, a similar argument could be made for other suspensions, such as domestic violence suspensions. Is this a good idea? Or is it a terrible anti-player pro-billionaire idea that the union would never go for? From a crime and punishment perspective, does this create too harsh a penalty that does not fit the crime? So this thought came to Ethan. Evidently, it also came to Britt. It came to Miles Michaelis, whom Britt quoted in that piece. Soto, Michaelis, we'll be talking about those guys in our previews today. But she seemed to say that there was some sentiment, at least among players, for not defending players who get suspended or at least are repeat offenders the way that Profar is. This column took a lot of flack, I would say, and some of which I would also say was probably justified. But yeah, Ethan, you're not the only one who is considering this hypothetical.
I think Britt does really good work.
Me too.
And I think that this is bad policy.
Yeah.
Major League Baseball has a very punitive drug agreement. And while you're suspended for PEDs, as Profar is about to find out for the second time, we should just take a moment. Like, what a bonehead, just like, don't be such a bonehead guy. Mm-hmm. What are you doing? What are you doing? Assuming that his suspension is upheld, he's going to miss out on an entire year of salary. All contracts in Major League Baseball carry some amount of risk that they will not result in the kind of performance the team was expecting when the player signed. And, this is obviously an instance where things are worse for the team in a way that is more directly the fault of the player than in, say, an instance of injury or just decline, underperformance. But I think part of the responsibility of a major league club when you're going to sign a guy to a multi-year contract is to have an understanding to the best of your ability of, who he is. And the Braves missed the mark. They don't have to pay him.
Not while he's suspended, but...
Not while he's suspended. They don't have to pay him while he's suspended. Mm-hmm. It's not like they have to play a man down. So I think that the escalating punishments in the CBA or in the joint drug agreement as it's currently constituted, where you have huge jumps in the number of games and a 3 strikes and you're out policy, I think that that's fine. I think the way that it's set up is fine. I think setting precedent for teams being able to void deals is a dangerous precedent to set. I think it's a bananas thing to entertain going into a CBA negotiation year. But knowing what we know about Miles Mikolas, perhaps not super surprising. I do think it is instructive to hear from players about how offensive they find the notion of some of their brethren taking performance-enhancing drugs. I do think there are guys for whom that is a deeply problematic course. But as you noted when we talked about Profar's suspension, this also wasn't really a problem, right?
Yeah.
There just aren't that many guys on big multi-year big league deals who are getting popped for, forgive a gross way of describing this, pissing hot. There just aren't that many of them, And so I think this is a solution in search of a problem more than it is anything else. I also think that the union has to represent its membership. It has to represent its membership in moments where they are the aggrieved party, and they have to represent the membership when they are the ones doing the grieving.
Yep.
Because that's their job as a union, and we can't have them selectively living up to the responsibility to advocate on behalf of their membership. So I wish that Miles Mikolas would read a book. And I think that from a policy perspective, this sets you on a road that has really bad consequences for labor in circumstances where labor has not pissed hot. Mm-hmm. I decided I wanted to say that twice, I guess.
I could tell. Yeah. Yeah. So when Mikolas said he's got plenty of money and time now to defend himself without the need of the Players Association, I don't think the PA should be doing anything. Yeah. That's, I think, misunderstanding the purpose of the union. I understand why you wouldn't be super sympathetic to Profar.
Sure.
And maybe you're saying, yeah, he's a cheater. I don't cheat. He's trying to get an advantage over me. Why should I help him out indirectly? But you want the union to have your back if something happens.
Right.
Now, you might say, well, I'm not going to get caught doing that because I would never do that. Well, you could just accidentally trigger a test, but also it could be something else, right? And that's just a bright line for the union.
Yep.
And that's something that the MLB Players Association has going for it that other unions don't in some cases is they have guaranteed contracts, right? And it's not nebulous the way that contracts are in the NFL and other leagues where you see the number, but then the actual payout could turn out to be anything else. In MLB, you get that contract, you're going to get that money. And so, yes, setting some sort of precedent for letting teams out of guaranteed contracts, that's some dangerous territory. That's some slippery slope potential.
Yep.
Now, you could entertain this in the next round of bargaining. I if you don't want to make this particular case, a 2-time or 3-time offender or whatever, like if you don't want to go to bat for them every time. I think people misunderstand. It's very much a bedrock of like a union, of a legal system. Everyone's entitled to a defense.
And guess what? I'm gonna go out on a limb. I don't know what the results of the grievance are going to be, but I bet that Profar's not going to emerge from this with a reduced suspension. In all likelihood, he's going to serve 162.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah,
most likely.
And so if teams, like if the owners made it a top priority to say, in this specific instance, I saw some people also griping about Fernando Tatis's contract. Like he had the PD suspension. Maybe he was misleading the Padres or something. First of all, Tatis's contract, I think, looks pretty fine now that he's come back from the suspension and injuries and everything and has become a star again. Like what he's making is far from unreasonable. It might even be kind of a bargain potentially. But just putting that aside, I think because it's so limited, it's not that big an issue. As you said, it's just like a handful of guys that this has ever happened to who have multi-time suspensions. And if the union said, okay, like this is a concession maybe we're willing to make, because the whole testing system came about as a result of bargaining and concessions. And the players, for them, like instituting PD testing was not as much of a no-go as, say, a salary cap, right? Like they were willing to play ball, so to speak. They were motivated to some extent themselves to self-police or to, get the drugs out of the game. Like they didn't want to have people cheating. They wanted a more level playing field. They didn't want to feel the pressure that they had to take substances to keep up with their competitors and everything. And they wanted the game to be perceived as clean too. So the players had some incentive and a lot of them felt strongly about that. Like, yeah, we actually do want to hold the cheaters accountable because I'm not a cheater. So then that's how we ended up with the system that we have now and that we've had for quite a while. And this was collectively bargained. And so you don't want to unilaterally say, well, we agreed to have it work this way, but we're just going to hand you all this money back just out of the goodness of their hearts or something. If it came up in bargaining again and owners were making some big stink, I don't know why it would be a top priority for them because this doesn't happen all that often.
Doesn't happen very often.
If they did and you felt like you could extract some more valuable concession for them, if you said that, I don't know, whatever, like if someone is tests positive 2 or 3 times or something, then they're on their own or, I don't know, like you wouldn't want to just let people out to dry because there could be mistakes or false positives or something. But you could come to some agreement. You just decide, well, it's not a top priority for us to protect people who have been found to have tested positive, not just once, but multiple times. They should have known better. We warned them. We made resources available to them, et cetera. So if there's enough sentiment that they're willing to concede on that in order to get something from the other side, then I think that's, worth entertaining, I guess. It's just that that's not the way that it works currently. And to depart from the system they agreed on would be pretty foolhardy. So, yeah, it's not saying that Profar's a great guy and we believe he's innocent. It's just he's entitled to a defense because we want all of our members to be entitled to a defense.
Right.
Yep. All right. That's that. And the last thing I will note, we have talked on our bonus pods on occasion. I remember talking about how I'm quite fond of when a guitarist, a musician, has a signature instrument. It's usually a guitarist. They have a guitar that they've been using forever. And
like the actual instrument itself.
Yes. The one single. Yes. So, Neil Young has Old Black and he's been using it forever. Or Willie Nelson has Trigger. There's some of these famous ones. And it's cool because they show wear, they get old along with their players. And it's just and it outlives them. I mean, not to be morbid about it, but it's, if you see something something that you go to an exhibit, a museum or something, and you see someone's signature instrument, or even if it's like on loan or something, it's something that connects you to their performance and lives on after them. So I love that. I love when a musician has a signature guitar, like Brian May's guitar or whoever it is, right, who has some signature design and it accompanies them throughout their career. Brian May's Red Special, whatever it is. There are lots of examples. And I wish that this were a thing in baseball, but it's not really, because no one has a piece of equipment that stays with them forever. But I was reading a piece about Joe Sewell, who is most famous. He's a Hall of Famer, but he's most famous for being just an extreme contact hitter. And like when Luis Arraez was, relative to the league, he was like chasing Joe Sewell's greatest K percentage plus marks. It's unbelievable when you look back, even era adjusted. He just made contact with everything. And maybe by virtue of making such great clean contact forever, he had one bat that he used for his entire career, which I think is so cool.
How is that possible?
I know. You wouldn't think that it would be, but
what was it made out of?
Wood, but yeah,
Ben,
I mean,
thank you. What? No,
yeah, I know.
Wood?
You'll never guess.
What kind of wood? Was it like special?
So it was called Black Betsy, and he named it that because that was what Shoeless Joe Jackson liked to call his number one bat. And Sewell came from Alabama and Shoeless Joe was from the South. And so it was a Ty Cobb model bat. I don't know which wood it was, but it was a big bat, as bats were in those days. And Sewell was like, 5'6.5" was his listed height, but it was a 35-inch, 40-ounce bat,
Good
so
grief.
Maybe that was part of why it was indestructible seemingly, but he was using it for his whole career. He retired after 14 seasons, and he was still at least sporadically using that bat because Ty Cobb gave him that bat. And Ty Cobb gave it to George Burns on the Cleveland team. George Burns was using it, one of the George Burnses who was playing at that time on the 1920 team. And then Sewell came up and joined the team in September, and Burns gave Sewell one of his Cobb model bats, and that became Black Betsy. And he used it throughout his career. And sometimes he'd use other bats. And if it was hot out, maybe he would use a lighter, merely 36-ounce model. But he used it every season of his career. And he said long after his career in 1983, he said, I figure I got more than 1,000 hits from Black Betsy. And he got about 2,200 total career hits. And he cared for it. He boned that bat. Jeff and I talked about the practice of bat boning back in the day. So he boned that bat with a Coke bottle. He seasoned it with tobacco juice. And so it's very stained. And it was not actually a black bat, but it was dark because of all the boning and the juice, I suppose. But he did hit the ball hard. You might think, well, it was because he was just like a slap hitter and he was just, going for contact, but not power. But no, he hit for pretty solid power, actually, especially for someone his size in his era. So maybe it was a fluke. Maybe it was a product of the times. Maybe it was that he just made such incredibly clean contact that he just never hit it off the handle or anything. I don't know. Or maybe it was the boning and the seasoning. I don't know. But I think that's super cool. And I wish that we had that more often. I wish that we could have career-long relics and memorabilia where it wasn't just, oh, here's the jersey he wore on this one day, or here's a glove that he used for a while, or here's the cap because everything gets worn and used and replaced. And some stuff lasts for a while, but, especially these days when players, they all have sponsorships and equipment partnerships and lots of money, and they don't ever have to just wear down some piece of old equipment. They can constantly be, and of course with a glove you have to break it in, but then it gets broken down at a certain point, and
bats break, they shatter.
Yeah. And why would you ever just stick with the same, whatever, batting glove, cap? I mean, these things get dirty and gross. So I don't know why you would keep it. But if someone had this miraculous ability, I think it's just the coolest thing to say, like, yeah, here's the bat he used his entire career, not just that one game or that one memorable moment, but like, yeah, this was with him the entire time. This was one of the secrets to his success. I wish there were a way we could bring that back. I don't know that it ever was the norm, but make it more of the norm. And I guess it would have to be like if you allowed some kind of composite bat that were much, much stronger or something, and that would probably have other knock-on effects because it would affect the batted ball quality. So it's more trouble than it's worth. I just wish there were a few more Joe Sewells in the game today and more Black Betsies, because that's awesome.
Well, and I have asked you before, like, how long does it take them to break in their cleats? Do they get blissies while they're waiting for their cleats to break in? So I'm with you. I have questions, but I just think about how often guys' bats shatter,
Less often than they used to, because they've been made more stable and less likely to splinter and impale someone, but that does still happen.
They still crack,
They do. Unfortunately.
Do you want to hear more from Cal Raleigh?
Oh, yeah.
I hate that this is a thing. I really don't think it's a big deal, a big story. It shouldn't be a thing. I love Randy. I have all the respect for him and Team Mexico. I have a responsibility to my teammates and the country to be focused and locked in. And like I said, there's no harm or bad blood. There's nothing behind it. It doesn't matter who's on the other side.
All right. You can focus and still shake someone's hand, I think. But
you can tell that they are desperate to, they being the Mariners are desperate to quell this because
of course,
the initial tweet from Daniel Kramer was retweeted by Mariners PR.
Yep.
We get it. You all love each other. Give a little kiss and then we'll believe you. We got to have a little kiss.
Yes. Well, good luck downplaying it all. Anyway, okay. Raymond chimes in that the runs allowed per defensive out tiebreaker in the WBC is definitely a case of creating perverse incentives.
Yeah.
If it came to it, Korea could have intentionally let Australia tie and then try to hold them scoreless for 40 extra innings to lower their average. So, yeah, I guess maybe so. But I don't know that anyone's going to explore those edge cases. But let's take a brief break, and then we will talk about a team that is responsible for more than its fair share of strangeness and also activity this offseason, the New York Mets with Tim Britton, followed by the Nats with Spencer Nussbaum.
When I'm riding the bus or going for a walk, one strap on my head, then listen to people talk. I want to hear about baseball with nuance and puffy and stats. Yeah. Don't want to hear about pitcher wins or about gambling odds. Only want to hear about Mike Trout hypotheticals and the texture of the hair on the arm growing out of one's head. Gross. Give me effectively wild. Give me effectively wild. Give me effectively wild. This is effectively wild.
Okay, let's talk about the New York Mets with a senior writer for The Athletic, Tim Britton, who covers the Mets. And so how appropriate it is that he is with us for this segment. Hello, Tim.
Hey, Ben. How are you?
Doing well, and we have a lot of Mets news to talk about. Very eventful offseason, high turnover rate roster. And so I will lead with, how many eggs did Ryan Lambert consume today? Because I think that's foremost on the minds of Effectively Wild listeners.
And were they cooked?
Were they cooked? Share whatever you care to about Ryan Lambert, the person, Ryan Lambert, the gourmand, whatever you have learned about Lambert this spring.
Sometimes as a reporter, it's frustrating that you're not allowed in the food room and that, players take their time eating and you don't get to see them interact in kind of a natural way. And then other times you read your fellow Mets writer Anthony DiComo write about Ryan Lambert and his egg consumption. You think maybe it's a good thing that the kitchen is off limits for us, that we don't get to see what actually goes on in there.
Even if you hadn't seen him eat, did this track for you? Were you surprised when you read the story, or were you thinking, yeah, that checks out?
I mean, I think in so much as you could not be surprised by someone consuming that many raw eggs on a daily basis. Like if you had asked me who among the 70 plus players the Mets had in big league spring training to begin this spring would have been that guy, I probably would have landed on Lambert pretty quickly.
Okay. But he has not rebuked you personally for your use of creamer or anything like that?
No. I have not heard any nutritional tips from him on my eating habits because fortunately players are also not privy to that from our perspective. So they don't know how poorly we eat, especially in spring training.
Yeah, he and I might be able to bond over this egg thing, but he's a bit extreme even by my standards. So quantity at least, but not the preparation, perhaps. Okay. We can talk about actual major Mets news that people might want to hear about. Where do we even start with this team? I guess maybe one just high-level look we could kind of start with is, was this the plan? Either just this amount of turnover or the shape that it took, the particular moves. Of course, a lot of it was contingent on, okay, if we don't get Kyle Tucker, then maybe we get Bo Bichette, and you can't plan all of that beforehand. But when they started tinkering and then wholesale remodeling this roster, whether it was, with the Nimmo trade, Semien at the start of the offseason, did they envision how all of this was going to go down, or did it take them by surprise sometimes as much as it did those of us following from afar?
Yeah, I don't think the specifics of it were necessarily in their mind at the start of the offseason. I think, at the end of last season, the idea that Pete Alonso would be somewhere else, that made a lot of sense to a lot of people. The idea that Jeff McNeil might be moved and for not a big major league level return made sense. Diaz, you could see, was not necessarily the type of player that David Stearns would invest a whole lot in, but that you probably predicted that was likelier he would come back than not. And the surprising thing was the ability to trade Brandon Nimmo. I think it wasn't surprising that the Mets were willing to move Nimmo, but I don't know that anyone thought they'd be able to find a taker for him, even with them bringing on, Marcus Semien, who is coming off a down season, is older than Nimmo, also has 3 relatively expensive years left on his deal as opposed to Nimmo's 5. So I think there is some narrative thought that the Mets went in and said, we have to blow up this position player group. We need to get rid of all of these guys. In essence, it was kind of individual decisions that all made sense and happened to create this larger picture. And it started with just understanding that Nimmo had some value on the market, that they could move him now rather than get locked into kind of a decline phase that it seemed like he was going to start pretty soon.
Like red paper clipping their way to an entirely new infield, and not entirely new. Lindor remains, and maybe we can start with him actually. What is the current state of Lindor given the injury, and when do you expect him back on the field?
They have been steadfast in their optimism that he will be ready for opening day. They say his recovery is going as planned. He's started hitting in the batting cages. We don't get to see that in spring, but we've seen him on the field taking some ground balls. He's been part of the defensive drills the entirety of spring training. But now he's actually participating in them rather than just kind of being a bystander. They've been very confident ever since he had that surgery right at the start of spring training that it would be kind of 6 weeks. I think it was 43 days between the surgery and opening day. And whereas some other teams kind of ruled out, the Orioles basically said Jackson Holliday would not be ready for opening day when he had surgery right around the same time. The Mets believe Lindor will be there. David Stearns said earlier this week that he will have to play in a game of some sort in spring training. His first game action this year will not be against Paul Skeens on opening day, which is probably a good idea. And so, maybe it's a Grapefruit League game that last week. Maybe it's some backfield action in a minor league game where he can get, an at-bat every inning, something like that. When I talked to Lindor, I said, is there a number of at-bats you like to get? I mean, he usually gets 50 in spring training, 50 or so. And he said it's really more about feel, and that might take 50 at-bats. Other times it can take 5. And he thinks he's able to get to that point, even if it is just on the backfield. So they're still confident that come March 26th, when Skeens is on the mound at Citi Field, that Francisco Lindor will be the first batter to face him.
Well, Lindor, with 5 seasons under his belt with this team, must be one of the longest tenured Mets at this point. And after the departures of Alonso and McNeil and Nimmo and Diaz, must be a bit of a different vibe in camp this spring. So are there icebreakers? Are there name tags? I guess everyone has a jersey and numbers and names, and your info's at your locker soccer, so maybe you don't actually need name tags, but has there been a getting to know you feel at camp this year? Is it discernibly different in any way?
I think really more so than the player personnel, it's been getting to know the coaching staff for the players. Because while Carlos Mendoza is still here, the Mets have 2 new hitting coaches and a director of Major League Hitting who had previously worked in their minor league system, in Jeff Albert. They have a new pitching coach. They have a new bench coach, Kai Correa, who is running their defensive drills, a new third base coach, a new first base coach. Like it is, I think, Jose Rosado as the bullpen coach is the only coach who was a holdover in the same position as he was last year. So that's been probably guys are relatively familiar with other players in the league. It probably takes a little bit more time to get to know a coach at this point in the season. But the vibe in camp, I mean, it's been really since the Lindor injury, it's been relatively uneventful for them. They haven't had the kind of setbacks, especially in the pitching staff that we've grown used to with the Mets. They've experienced at least one spring training injury every spring in the starting rotation every year since 2020. They have not had one yet, but of course there are still 10 to 11 days to go. So
dangerous words, Tim. Dangerous words.
Say.
Yeah.
And I think the vibe has been relatively loose in the clubhouse. You know, they have a basketball hoop in their clubhouse. It was used a lot a couple of years ago. It seemed to be used less last year, and now Freddie Peralta is playing on it all the time. And they've got some younger guys who have come up and joined Sean Manaya's chess club. So these are the types of stories you gravitate toward as a fan base when you have the kind of disappointing season the Mets had in 2025 and try to read the tea leaves and say it's all going to be kumbaya again the way it was in 24. I don't want to extrapolate that far, but it's been a laid back, loose camp for them insofar as you could judge things at this point in the year.
Yeah, and two-parter, does that turnover on the coaching staff say anything about Mendoza's job security coming off of the collapse last year? And then relatedly, is there any leadership void in the clubhouse with all of those high-profile departures we just talked about? Or is this seen as, no, it's Lindor's team, it's Soto's team, it's some particular person's team to the extent that that's a real thing and not a media construction? I know that there was some talk of issues between Soto and Lindor last year that they have tried to put behind them this spring.
Yeah, first with Mendoza, I mean, he's also in the last guaranteed year of his contract. The Mets have a club option on him for 2027. When you come off of the kind of disappointing season that they had last year, and Mendoza was upfront that he felt he didn't do the kind of job he should have done. He said that his communication wasn't where it needed to be. And there were maybe times where he thought that the kind of laid back approach that had worked for him in 2024, the we're going to be okay approach he took the first 2 months of 2024, when he ran that back in 2025, they weren't okay in the end. So maybe he has to adjust that and tailor that to the specific personnel. So I think it's reasonable to wonder about his long-term job security at this point in time. And in terms of the leadership in the clubhouse, you know, of those guys who left, Nimmo was probably the one who took on the largest mantle of leadership previously. You know, Alonso was kind of the face of the franchise for a little bit, but was not necessarily the guy standing up in front of the room and addressing the team at various junctures. And Lindor is still a guy who does that. And still probably, you know, Steve Cohen said there will be no captain during his ownership. If they were voting for a captain, it would probably be Lindor. He's still that guy. But when my partner on the beat, Will Salmon, and I were reporting out on whether there was this clubhouse issue last year or not at the end of last season, you know, one thing that we heard from people inside the organization was this idea that a team is just one guy's team. It's just not really realistic. It's, you know, the best teams kind of have leaders in every department of the team. You've got a starting pitcher who leads your group. You've got a reliever who leads your group. You've got a position player, maybe a catcher, like different guys in different spots that lead in their own way and their own example. And so we'll see if that evolves for this team. You've got some veterans in addition to Lindor. You know, Marcus Semien is a guy who's been in the league for a long time and has a lot of clubhouse cachet. Bo Bichette has been known as a pretty good clubhouse presence as well. And then you've got some young guys coming up who could take that on at some point. So it's an interesting dynamic and a group that obviously that clubhouse situation is something we're going to be paying extra close attention to this year, coming off of 2 years where in 2024, it was a really joyous group that really propelled them. In 2025, it was more of a neutral group that wasn't able to right the ship when things went wrong. So that will be an area of focus, and I'm interested in seeing how that group gels over the course of the season.
You're going to have to re-embrace Grimace. That was the secret glue holding it all together. You got new coaches, you got a bunch of new guys on the team, and everyone is playing a different position than they used to play. So Jorge Polanco's a first baseman now, and Bo Bichette's a third baseman, and you have, Juan Soto shifting over to left. Talk to us about their sort of ideal defensive alignments and some of the thinking that's gone into how to best prepare these guys, because, Jorge Polanco was a second baseman. He can probably play first base, but this is a lot of change all at once on top of it being a bunch of new personnel. So talk to us about the defensive piece of it.
Yeah, well, the Mets did. I think they tried out basically the line in the offseason that our infield is for shortstops, because all those guys came up as shortstops and have played it in the major leagues. And the general thought is like, well, isn't every major league infielder a shortstop at some point in their career? Right. Mark Vientos was drafted as a shortstop. Bichette's shift from short to third, they aren't too concerned about. They did initially look at him. Their initial contact with him in the offseason was for him to play second base for them. And I think most people expected that no matter where Bichette signed, he was probably going to be playing second base or third, pretty soon, if not right away in 2026. So they're not too concerned about that shift. They think that he's got the tools, that the range that was maybe the issue at shortstop, it will not be a problem at third base, could actually be above average there, and that his arm is in fact strong enough to play that position. Polanco at first, it's been a little bit slower in spring training. He hasn't been in as many games as Bichette because the Mets have been careful with his history of knee issues. And they've been upfront that this is not, Jorge Polanco is not going to be starting 155 games for them at first base. That he's going to be playing, he's going to be in the DH slot a fair amount of time. Last year, I think a majority of his starts in Seattle came as the DH. So they also have Vientos at first base, a guy who has a moderate amount of experience there, especially compared to his teammates. And then Brett Beatty, who played third for them last year, is learning first base as well in spring training. So they've had a lot of work on first base fundamentals. As we all know from a famous movie, first base, totally easy position to learn. You don't have to adjust at all. That's been another thing you're watching a lot of in spring. And to this point, there haven't been any glaring issues. No one's dropping routine throws to first base. No one's lost on pop-ups or anything like that. But we'll see how that evolves over the course of the season. And in the outfield, Soto has played left before. I don't think they're worried too much about that. Adding Luis Robert in center gives them a plus defender there. They think that their up-the-middle defense with Lindor, Semien, Robert, and even the strides that Francisco Alvarez made defensively behind the plate in the second half of last year is in a much better place than where it was last year. And that the corners should be, the corners were pretty bad for them last year, that the corners can be improved as well, even if they're not elite league-wide.
Did the Mets think that they came close to signing Tucker? It seemed like they were offering a similar structure, but was it a matter of being outbid by the Dodgers or just the Dodgers having a more compelling pitch? Because the Mets are still trying to remake themselves into Dodgers East, and the Dodgers are already the Dodgers.
And I think they felt they were competitive for him. I don't know that there was ever a time where they thought, like, we're actually going to get this guy. Because even talking to people inside the organization, that week when it was pretty clear that Tucker was going to make his decision, they were not sounding that optimistic about it. To be fair, that they didn't sound that optimistic about landing Juan Soto in the same kind of time frame the year before, and they did get Soto. So, and I think the speed at which they were able to pivot back to Bichette, someone who they had stayed in contact with in a way that I did not realize over the course of the offseason. I don't think many reporters realized over the course of the offseason how surprising that was, that they were ready to move elsewhere if Tucker did ultimately make the decision to go to LA for a deal that was more than the Mets had offered, and maybe fits what Tucker was looking for, not just in terms of a team that's winning, but a team that he doesn't have to be the guy and isn't looked at as the guy or one of the main guys coming in even at the start of the season.
Well, he won't be playing right field, so who will be? This is your opportunity to tell us if Carson Benji is going to make the opening day roster.
It will be interesting. This is the Mets' first real position battle since 2019 when Pete Alonso won the first base job over, get this, Todd Frazier, who was injured that spring. Benj has had a really good spring. He's their first-round pick from 2024 out of Oklahoma State. Left-handed batter, really smooth swing, goes the other way really well, and with some authority. His swing really evolved over the course of last season, and he showed kind of quickness to adapt at various levels. Didn't look great in the final 2 weeks in AAA, but even if you break that down on like a week-by-week basis, it was basically like an 0 in the first week and a 300 average the second week. So they think he's got the ability to handle the pressure in the New York market and to handle Major League pitching. But they also don't want to rush him. It's 2.5 weeks in AAA. Mike Tauchman is a guy they signed to a minor league deal pretty late in the offseason, really just before spring training, and is kind of more of a known quantity, a guy who's going to give you 720-ish OPS probably. Competent defense in the corner outfield, can also play some center. So if they want to kind of keep the seat warm for Benj, Tauchman would make sense. But Benj has had a really nice spring. He's hitting over 350 in the spring. How much you care about surface level spring statistics is your mileage may vary on that, but has done everything that they laid out before the start of camp. What do you need to see from him? He's been doing all those things, which is looking competitive in his at-bats, handling everything in the outfield, showing some speed on the bases, giving them kind of a different look at the bottom part of their lineup than they've had in years past. So with 10 days to go, I think it's still up in the air. I think it'd be hard to send him down at this point, the way he's played, but they've done that in the past with other guys. So it's kind of tough to get a read on it at this point, but I know who fans want to see, and that's Carson Bench in right field.
Benj, not Benji, Benj. I'm going to get it right eventually. Benj.
The problem is Benji is the nickname for him, obviously. So you hear both.
Get out of town. So really, I'm just being overly familiar. I'm not mispronouncing his name. Okay. Well, I think that's worse, actually. I'd rather say it wrong than be overly familiar. Benj.
Francisco Alvarez has tantalizing talent, and he looked every bit the superstar that it seemed like he could turn into down the stretch last season. After his promotion following the demotion, he was one of the best hitters and players in baseball down the stretch. So all he has to do is just keep hitting like that all year. Easy. So can he do that or something akin to it?
I mean, he certainly looks that way in spring training. He's been hitting the ball really hard. A lot of 105s off the bat. He homered on Tuesday, again, over the batter's eye at Clover Park. So everything, the issue he had last year was he went through a swing change between 2024 and 2025, one that he really wanted to do himself. He had talked about it with JD Martinez and how many success stories in baseball have started with this guy talked to JD Martinez or JD Martinez's hitting coaches about an overhaul. But it just didn't work out for Alvarez, in part because, he was where he last spring had the hamate injury that Lindor is enduring this spring. And so he didn't get kind of the spring training to work through those swing changes against live pitching. So he gets into games in late April in the regular season and just did not have the power that we were used to seeing from him. Looked kind of in between on a lot of swings. And so when he went down to AAA at the end of June, it was basically not to overhaul the swing back, but to find like a middle ground between his prior swing and the swing he was trying to get to. And he was able to do that over a couple of weeks in AAA. He hit a ton of home runs there. And then when he came back to the majors, looked it was probably the best prolonged stretch of play we've seen from him in the major leads. Guy who hit 25 home runs as a rookie, and then only hit 11 the second year, and I forget what he ended up with last year, somewhere around 10 or 11. But when he was sent down, had only 3 for the season. So if it all goes according to plan, if he's able to stay healthy as well, because he's run into a lot of hand issues running the bases or behind the plate as a catcher, if he's able to stay healthy and play, 100, 110 games behind there, can hit 25 home runs for you, that changes the look of their lineup again. That's a guy who can hit 5th for you maybe rather than 7th or 8th.
What is the team's plan to sort of help Luis Robert Jr. get back on track? Because we all remember how sort of spectacular he was in that 2021 season, even better from a WAR perspective in 2023. And then it has been 2 years of injury and mediocrity at the plate and sort of diminishing returns in the outfield. So what is their approach to getting him back on track? How much of it do they just attribute to bad health? And how do you think the change of scenery is going to benefit him?
They attribute a lot of it to bad health. Their first step one after they acquired him was kind of working on his lower half. They've said, most of the injury issues that he's had have been below the waist. And so they think kind of strengthening that area for him will allow him to stay healthier for longer. I also think, the Mets last year had a bunch of guys that they ran out there every day that, Alonso and Nimmo and Lindor and Soto were basically in the lineup like 158 of the 162 games. Robert is not going to be that type of player for them. I think they're targeting more like if he's fully healthy, he's going to play 135 or 140 games for them to be proactive about keeping him healthy through the season. Even in spring training, like he has not played in a Grapefruit League game yet. The plan is for him to get in there later this week, but he's been playing just every other day in minor league games, looking really good. But I don't know how much you want to take away from looking really good in backfield minor league games at spring training. So they're really encouraged by what they've seen so far. They think they're getting his swing back to the spot it was in 2023 when he was his best self. But for him, really, the floor is being a good plus defender in center field. If they can get offense, the kind of offense he delivered even last year just against left-handed pitching, if they get that's really good for their lineup. And if he's anything close to what he was during his best years, that's just kind of icing from their perspective.
All right, take us through a few of the mid-20s homegrown guys who are around here, and it's kind of unclear how and where they fit in with all the moving parts that we've seen. Speaking of Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, and Ronnie Mauricio, what will their roles be?
Well, we'll start with Beatty because he's the one who had the best season last year. Really was good in the second half of the season. I think he was second on the team in OPS after the All-Star break to Soto. He played third base last year, a little bit of second base. This year, the plan is really, I mentioned Polanco was going to see some DH time. When Polanco is DHing, especially against right-handed pitching, I would expect Beatty to be in there at first base. He is technically still an option in right field. He's learning that position as well. He's played out there a couple of times in the spring and has looked fine. When he learned second base on the fly last year, that kind of gave the Mets confidence that he could learn a couple different positions on the fly. And so they're trying that at first and in right field. The idea is basically, while he might not play the same position every day, that he should still be able to get 450 or 500 at-bats without much problem. And then, if anyone gets hurt on that infield, if Bichette goes down, if Semien goes down, if Polanco goes down, then Beatty is kind of the ready-made replacement for those guys. Vientos should make the team. He doesn't have any options remaining and would be kind of the other part of a platoon at DH with Beatty. Maybe if it's a lefty on the mound, you get Vientos in either at DH or at first base. So there's and the chance to grow into that role. And remember, Vientos hit 27 home runs in 2024, 6 more in the postseason. Looked every bit like the start of a middle of the order bat for them for years to come before regressing last season. He too had a nice little bump in the second half of last year, though it was not quite to the level that Alvarez's was. And he slumped again at the very end of the season, but someone they're not ready to give up on just yet. And then Mauricio was in the majors for a long stretch of last season. They basically carried him the final month plus of the season to preserve his minor league option for this year. He didn't play very much the last 6 weeks of the year. He looked really good against right-handed pitching as a left-handed batter. Did not look good against left-handed pitching from the right side of the plate. So my guess is he starts the year in AAA, just getting more seasoning. A guy who came up at the end of 23, showed some elite exit velocity, some really nice tools, towards ACL and missed all of 24, and then last year was kind of just working his way back. So I think getting him regular playing time after the year he had last year would be really important.
I guess we can talk about the pitching now, and we should talk a lot about their homegrown guys because I think that's so exciting. But we should maybe begin with the Freddie Peralta trade. How did this come together? What did they see in Peralta that made them so excited? And what chances do you think there are that they're able to get a further extension done with him? Because obviously he might have a bit of familiarity with the guy in charge.
It's been acquired by David Stearns twice, already been extended by David Stearns.
Right.
Although I think this one will probably be more than the, $15 million over 5 years that the last one was.
Might command a bit more than that.
Yes. What they liked in Peralta, kind of canvassing the market for starting pitching this offseason. They didn't want to go all in on a guy like Framber Valdez or Dylan Cease or Ranger Suarez. They didn't think those guys were necessarily real number one starters for them in 2026. And you can maybe argue Peralta doesn't quite fit that bill either as kind of like the top line opening day starter. But they thought that he was a guy who fit this rotation really well to kind of bump everyone down a slot. It's a lot easier for you to imagine Kodai Senga or Sean Manaea having a good season when you're not counting on them to be like your game one postseason starter.
Sure.
Kind of the way they were last year. those guys, Senga got Cy Young votes in 23. Manaea was essentially their best starter in the postseason in 24. So they can get there, but you don't want to count on that. You want that to be more of a bonus. So with Peralta at the top, the guy who's made 30 starts each of the last 3 years, Stearns knows him well from Milwaukee and knew in a way that I didn't for sure, that the personality would really fit in the clubhouse. A guy who really wanted to play in New York. You don't always hear that with players moving from a smaller market to a bigger market. Peralta has a lot of family in New York, so he's been very excited about being in New York. And you see that on a daily basis, even in spring training, and has looked good so far in spring, all caveats aside. They think he kind of makes the rotation whole, where you have him at the top as a reliable option. You've got Manaea and Senga as the veterans who've got some upside. And you've got Nolan McLean, who, starting for Team USA in the WBC, made 8 phenomenal starts for them down the stretch last season and looked sometimes a guy makes 8 starts and has a 2 ERA and it seems a little fluky. It didn't really with McLean, that the stuff, you don't have to explain what makes Nolan McLean good. When you're watching him, you kind of see it with the way his stuff moves. So they're really excited about his potential, right away in 2026. This isn't like he's going to grow into being a frontline starter. They think he can be pretty close to that pretty early this season. And then you've got David Peterson and Clay Holmes kind of filling in as well, guys who look better, again, as mid-rotation starters instead of top-of-the-rotation guys.
What was going on with Senga late last year? He got demoted. He didn't pitch well post-demotion. What was he working on this offseason, or what is he working on now?
The season was interrupted by the injury he had covering first base, the hamstring injury. Even before the injury, he didn't feel like his mechanics were where they needed to be. And Senga has been very meticulous with his mechanics. He's pretty candid about where they are or not at any given point. So even when he had basically a 1.5 ERA in June, he was disappointed with how he was feeling on a regular basis on the mound. He attributed that to kind of the injury he had in 2024 with the shoulder at the start of the season, coming back from that, having a calf injury that he never felt right even down the stretch of that season and wasn't able to find it in 2025. He feels really good about where they are now. He spent some time at Tread in North Carolina in the offseason and, has come out in spring training throwing 98, which he did not do at any point in the last 2 years. He's really happy with where he is with his mechanics. He thinks that, if he's able to maintain them where they are now, he's able to get to that upper echelon velocity, makes everything play up, allows him to repeat his delivery more, spot his pitches better, and then he can be the pitcher he was for most of 2023 when he was their best starter. So his first start in the spring, he looked really sharp, even though he gave up a couple of solo home runs. But they're really encouraged by what they've seen from him so far and think he can be closer to the best version of himself as well.
For the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of relievers try to make the jump back into the rotation, and to varying degrees of success. I think we would probably call Clay Holmes's return to the rotation a success. You saw a predictable decline in some of his stats. He struck out fewer guys. His velo dipped a bit. You saw the ERA and the other peripherals sort of move in the wrong direction, but they were still good, and he threw 165 innings, which I'm sure was a big help to the Mets. So what is his plan, and sort of what are his goals for year 2 of being a starter? Because there's room to improve, but also it's a 2-win season. It's not so bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had told him at the start of last year that Holmes would qualify for the ERA title with like a 3.5 or 3.6, whatever it ended up being, they would have been ecstatic about that. He made every start. He was their opening day starter last year. And, while he didn't pitch as deep into games as he or they would have liked on a consistent basis, the end results were pretty good. He's talked this spring about how much of a touch-and-go process it was for him last year, that, every few starts, he was kind of reevaluating how his mix was working, what he wanted to do with different pitches. He was a lot of guys incorporate one new pitch during a season. He was incorporating 3 basically this time last year, while doing a role change. So it was a lot on his plate. This year, it's been a little bit simpler for him, that he just kind of wants to refine how he uses his mix. He thought he got away from his sinker, his go-to pitch as a reliever. He thought he got away from it a little bit too often last year, especially in the middle of the season when he struggled more. So he thinks, just knowing his strengths better and how they play as a starter, which is different than how they played as a reliever, but might be the same strengths, can help him, if not just replicate what he did last year and maybe improve on it a little bit more, especially like peripherally striking out more guys, maybe pitching deeper into games on a more consistent basis.
And if you have not jinxed the health of the rotation and they actually do break camp with everyone not broken, then are we looking at a 6-man rotation to start the season potentially? Or how does that shake out? Or when anyone, whether Sean Manaea or someone else entirely, gets hurt eventually, then will we see Joe Natang be the next man up? How will that shake out?
Yeah, whenever I ask this of people with the Mets, they give me that look that's like, why would you even suggest that we would get there at this point in the spring? I do. Everything points to, if those 6 are healthy, that they will go with a 6-man rotation. They had opportunities in the offseason to move someone from that established group, and they decided they didn't want to do that. They preferred having the depth at the major league level. And whether they, with off days early in the season, it might be tougher to run a true 6-man, whether they use piggybacking or tandem starters in any way. That's on the table is all I've heard. I don't know that they'll commit to it, but they did do that a little bit at the end of last season. Holmes and Manaea were tandem starters for a couple of times through the rotation late last year when they were trying to figure things out. So I do think they'll go with 6. If someone does get hurt, Tobias Myers is probably first in line. Myers would be in the bullpen otherwise. It's kind of a multi-inning guy, but the other part of the Peralta trade, they really like having a guy who can do a bit of both, can give them 2 innings out of the bullpen, and even in some higher leverage spots, and then slide into the rotation if they need him. But you mentioned Tong. He was just optioned to AAA for the spring training portion of the year, and will start there. Will likely start in AAA, but a guy who probably pitched a little bit better than the 7 ERA suggests at the major league level last year. There were one start in particular against Texas where he got roughed up in 1 inning, got away from him based on some light contact. So I think he still feels pretty confident. The Mets feel pretty confident that the stuff is good enough at the major league level for him to be at least a mid-rotation starter. This was a guy who was as good as anyone in the minor leagues last year. So they still like the impact he's going to have at some point this year. And then the kind of overlooked guy is Christian Scott, who was their top pitching prospect going into 2024. Scott came up, made 9 starts that year, looked pretty good. I think it was a 4.5 ERA. Strikeout numbers fluctuated, but then had Tommy John surgery. He's back. Looks like he's in even better shape. Has spent some time refining his mix as well, throwing a kick change. So a 2025 spring training storyline redux for the Mets. And they think he's going to be another guy who plays a role for them this year in the starting rotation down the line.
So in addition to having previously lured former Yankees closer Clay Holmes across town, the Mets have now imported the 2025 Yankees back of the bullpen to be the 2026 Mets back of the bullpen. How do you think that's going to go? And how much do they like Devin Williams as an Edwin Diaz substitute?
I'm trying to think of the last person the Yankees employed as a closer who is not on the current Mets roster. It might be Rafael Soriano at this point. I think, both Williams and Weaver were guys whose peripheral stats suggested they had better 2025 seasons than the ERA said. The Mets believed Williams just kind of got off to a rough start. And after that was pretty good the last 5 months of the year for the Yankees. Again, Stearns has familiarity with him going back to Milwaukee. So they think, he's kind of gone through the difficult transition to New York that some players go through. He just did it across town, and now the Mets get to reap the benefits of that. That there's a reason they signed him even before they knew what was going to happen with Edwin Diaz, because they really liked him. They thought the price point was good for him, and they had to jump on that when they did. And when Diaz went elsewhere, they had kind of the ready-made replacement for him. With Weaver, again, a guy who had a couple outings go south for him down the last 6-ish weeks of the season that probably made the ERA and the surface level numbers look bad. But he's worked a lot on a cutter, getting that back where he wants it to be this spring. And a guy that they think, again, can pitch in a couple different roles for them, can go more than 3 outs if they need, but probably is going to be the primary setup man alongside Brooks Raley. And when he comes back healthy, probably in May, AJ Minter, whose loss last year was one that they really highlighted as being impactful for them in the pitching staff.
This strikes me as a group that's pretty well formed, but if any of them underperform, are there guys in the high minors who strike you as likely bullpen candidates we might see this year?
I mean, you can start with Ryan Lambert.
Don't egg him on, Tim.
Oh, no, Ben. Terrible. God.
A guy, he throws 100. It's not just that he throws 100, it's that he throws it with an induced vertical break of like 19 inches, which is a combination that is extremely rare. Basically, the only guys last year in the majors who threw as hard as Lambert with that kind of carry are Trevor McGill and Jeremiah Estrada. Guys who had really nice relief seasons. So you can see kind of the tools being there if he is able to find the strike zone, which has been more of a concern for him.
Induced vertical break is when he cracks open the shell before downing yolk, white and all. Okay, continue.
Dylan Ross is a guy they brought up right at the end of last season, spent 2 days in the major leagues, but did not appear in a game. But they think, he could eventually play the kind of role that like Ryan Stanek did for them the last couple of years. He's got similar stuff to Stanek with a high 90s fastball and splitter. Those are 2 guys off the top of my head. And actually, Adbert Alzolay, the former Cubs closer, is in camp. He's not on the 40-man roster, but a guy they signed ahead of last season, ahead of 2025, because he had Tommy John the previous year to kind of do the rehab with them. He got into some winter ball games at the very end of last year and had kind of a normal offseason, has been a full participant in camp. Probably not likely to break camp with the team, but someone who down the line over the course of the season is likely to play a role at the major league level.
And of course, it makes your pitching look a bit better if your defense is good, which was one of their goals going into this winter. But given how this winter went and all the players who were playing out of their previous positions, at least, is there a realistic chance that this is a good defensive team after being a below average one last year?
I think it's reasonable to expect them to be average to slightly above average. Again, like they did bring in Semien and Robert, 2 above average defenders at positions where that really helps. I think regardless of who's playing first base most of the time, they think that person can probably be better than Alonso was last year. Alonso was not as, last year was his worst defensive season by a fair margin. So they think that really, even if they were bringing him back, they would expect him to be better than he was last year. But they think that Polanco / Beatty / Vientos can be better than they got out of first base last year. They think Soto should be better than he was last year, kind of irrespective of the switch across the outfield. They think they've located some things that can help him get better jumps on balls. And even like Lindor, last year was as bad a defensive season as he's had in a while. It's not like he had more errors. It just seemed like they were mistimed or that those errors cost them a bit more often. So they think he should be better as well up the middle. So, throw that all together, you're probably not looking at a top 5 defensive outfit. It's not probably a team like Milwaukee was last year or the Cubs, where the defense is a real strength. But if it's no longer the kind of weakness it was, especially the last couple months of last year, that's still a positive development for them.
We've talked about how they aspire to be sort of Dodgers East. They are second in baseball from a payroll perspective, behind only those Dodgers. I'm curious sort of what the outer bounds of Steve Cohen's appetite to spend might be, because this is a good team, really terrific rotation. They're good at pitching development now. They got all of these new guys. They're playing new positions. But, they have to compete in a difficult league, and they compete in a difficult division. If they find themselves in a position at the deadline where they need to take on salary to get a deal done to help them push ahead, do you think that there's appetite for that?
Probably. Their payroll has been in the same general area the last few years, but you go back to, 2023 when they looked like they were signing Carlos Correa, and we're going to blow past anywhere anyone had been before. So Cohen, for the right move, for the move he thinks is going to be the difference, has shown that he will pay in the past. So I would expect that moving forward. We'll see. I think next offseason, depending on where we are from a labor perspective, it'll be interesting to see kind of how aggressive they pursue someone like Tarek Skubal, whether they go all out for him in a way that they haven't for a pitcher since losing out on Yamamoto to the Dodgers. They understand that it takes a lot of money to compete, especially when the Dodgers are in your league. But also they feel pretty good about where they are as a farm system and the relative cost control they're going to have at some positions coming up. If Benj takes over in right field this year, if you've got McClain and Tong in the rotation, even if Scott is part of that, then you've got cost-controlled starters. If you start churning out kind of cost-controlled pre-arb relievers the way that Stearns is able to in Milwaukee, that changes how much you spend there. AJ Ewing is probably the next guy in the prospect pipeline that people are really excited about. Could be part of their outfield picture in 2027. If you start dotting it around with impact talent from your farm system, it becomes a little bit easier to sign Juan Soto to a 15-year contract and kind of have the select few stars you really spend on in free agency rather than having to spend so much on Frankie Montas and those kind of fill-in players.
Well, this is a fraught question when it comes to the Mets, but what would constitute success for this team this season over and above not having it finish the way that last year did?
Obviously, the bare minimum is getting back to the postseason. I think if they were to miss the postseason again, Carlos Mendoza's job would be in serious jeopardy. And I think you'd start to hear murmurs about David Stern's job. Steve Cohen waited a while to hire David Stearns. He'd been wanting him for several years before he was able to hire him. So I don't think it would be in too much trouble at the end of even another disappointing season, but he'd be moving closer to that cliched hot seat. So I think it starts there. And I think it would still register as a relative disappointment if they were not able to advance in the postseason. I think this is a team that believes it should be in the top 2 to 4 of the National League, alongside LA, alongside, Atlanta, Philly, Chicago. That's the group they think they should be with. And if they fall short of that group, I think it would register as a disappointment internally and, of course, with the fan base.
And what are the chances that Craig Kimbrell comes up and blows just enough games to keep them from making the playoffs / winning the division?
Are you suggesting he's another Atlanta Braves mole in the Mets organization? Some fans have not forgiven Tom Glavine for the final start of the 2007 season. So we'll see. Kimbrell, he's looked okay in spring. We'll see.
Kimbrell's done it in enough places that I don't think it's specific to the Mets. It's more of a Kimbrell issue.
Yeah, well, we'll see how they handle him coming out of spring. That is another one of the interesting roster decisions they have facing them in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, that's a matter of some concern, just given how many teams we've seen entrust Craig Kimbrell with high leverage roles and how many teams have rued the day they did that. Well, we never rue the day that we invite Tim Britton on to talk Mets with us, nor do we rue it when we read his work at The Athletic, which we encourage everyone to do. Thank you, as always, Tim.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I've eaten several eggs during this whole thing.
And I couldn't even tell because you downed them. You didn't even have to chew. Just swallowed them. And yeah, they go down easy that way. So I've heard. I don't know from personal experience. Okay. Let's take a quick break, and then we will venture elsewhere in the NL East to talk to one of Tim's newest colleagues, Spencer Nussbaum, about the Washington Nationals.
The wacky hypotheticals are perfectively styled, and the stat blast queries are detectively compiled. The nonagerian baseball legends selectively dialed, but their spiciest takes are still respectfully mild. More than 2,000 episodes retrospectively filed, and at each new one we still collectively smile. That's effectively wild. That's effectively wild.
All right, let's talk about the Washington Nationals with The Athletic's brand new Nationals beat writer. So new that the packaging has not yet been removed. The byline has not been broken in yet. Spencer Nussbaum, is this your first official interview as the Athletic beat writer for the Washington Nationals?
Now that you bring it up, it is. And what's funny is I'm getting these messages multiple times a day that are asking, when are you actually starting? So I guess this I should count as my official start with the company.
Yeah, I guess the actual answer is next week, probably, right? So you're not quite on the clock yet, but you know what you're doing because you've been beat writing for some time, formerly for the Washington Post. And we're here primarily to preview the Nationals, not to review you. But we did, of course, briefly lament the demise of the Washington Post sports section on this podcast and at greater length on my other show, Hang Up and Listen, where we talked to one of your former colleagues, Jesse Doherty. And it's been nice to see a lot of you catch on in new places. Prime among them, maybe The Athletic, where several of you were brought on board. But take us through, I guess, the whirlwind of the last month or two of your life and your former colleagues' lives. And I know that you may be limited in exactly what you can say. I don't want to jeopardize any severance or violate any NDAs or anything here. So tread as carefully as you need to. But tell us a little bit. While, I'm sure you're super excited about your new job, about the old gig, because it was something that saddened a lot of us in sports media and sports readers in general.
I'd say first and foremost, I'm sure that Jesse Doherty explained this much more eloquently than I'm about to. But yeah, no, it's been a weird, at times depressing, and in small moments also uplifting sort of last month and a half. I think when all of this started to kind of come together and we started to hear about it, it did take you by surprise in the sense that we knew that, at times things get downsized and contracted and whatnot. But I don't think any of us expected one of the major papers in the U.S. and one of the major metropolitan regions in the U.S. to get, its sports section shuttered. So that was a surprise, I think, to all of us. What's been really uplifting over the last month is how many people have reached out, people that I've either never met before, maybe had a brief conversation with, who told me that their experience with the Washington Post was my same experience growing up reading the Boston Globe, which is every morning they'd open the paper and they'd see either my name or Andrew Golden's name and they'd read about the Nationals. That's something that I feel like when you're kind of in the thick of it, you don't always comprehend or you don't always think about. And so that was really uplifting to see A, that, and B, just how quickly a lot of us have been able to land on our feet after this. So yeah, it's been above all else a tough month, and a lot of people who should be employed right now are not. But you do kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel, even if, what happened was obviously an atrocity.
Yeah. And you mentioned Andrew. He caught on at the Baltimore Banner. He's now doing sports enterprise and features reporting, so not focusing specifically on the Nats anymore. But good to see you guys, former colleagues on the beat, being back in action, and many of your colleagues. And I hope that will be the case for anyone else who is still out there looking for work, because obviously a storied sports section and dismaying and somewhat infuriating circumstances surrounding its closure. But you will all go on to do excellent work in other places, and at The Athletic specifically in your case. So I guess we can get into the Washington Nationals, the team you're covering. They are a young team, at least, well, really at all levels. I guess there's not much of a distinction when it comes to front office, field staff, players. It's a youth movement. So tell us what you observed as far as changes in how the team has operated, moving from the Mike Rizzo era into the Poboni era, as we have dubbed him on this podcast. How have things changed? How have things yet to change?
Outside of the 26-man roster, everything has changed, is honestly the way that I would put it. They've gone from being an outlier in one direction where, again, you had analytical minds and forward-thinking people in the organization, but it really wasn't how everything was showing up on the field. It didn't have the same processes that other organizations will have. It was, obviously one of the older coaching staffs, one of the older, heads of front office. Now it's young everywhere, and it's trying to catch up every single place they can. I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into this. Some of this will take time. Obviously, when you're this young, both from a coaching staff perspective and from a team perspective, you're very moldable, but there's also a lot of room to grow. When I think about this team and where they were 12 months ago, it's a completely different operation, top to bottom. So, will they be all that good next year? I think that remains to be seen, but they will definitely be different in a way that is really compelling when I'm around the team every single day.
Top to bottom in a lot of important ways, although the same in terms of ownership. And I'm curious sort of how much of a gating factor that remains for the progression of this organization. Obviously, the Nationals have had recent success. I think sometimes we forget that they won the World Series in 2019 just because they didn't get to do an on-field victory lap in 2020. But how much of a mandate to change do you think they will be able to execute, given some of the broader constraints that still exist for the franchise?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely something you have to think about. And there was a very good story in the now deceased Washington Post last year about ownership that I encourage everyone to check out. So it's definitely not the smoothest ownership operation in baseball. But what I will say is, and what I've heard early on, talking to people around the organization, is that they have had a lot more leeway to operate like a new age organization than they have in the past. Now, does that mean that they can, double their R&D staff right away or add 12 coaches at every development level. And, no, it doesn't. But it does mean that, they've added at least a handful of coaches at every affiliate. They've brought in a lot of new people, a lot of new technology that previously either, wasn't pushed for, wasn't approved, is all of a sudden there. It's a lot of the things that you expect a new age organization to do, and it's been approved by ownership so far. Again, I'm sure that if you gave truth serum to everyone in the organization, they would tell you like, hey, there are still areas where we'd love to have a little more money here, a little more money there. I'm sure if you talk to the players, obviously they would want to have added more veterans in the clubhouse. But no, it seems like ownership has been less of a constraint this year than in the past. But I will always be wary on that front until they've proven, hey, we are spending like we were in 2018, 2019, both payroll-wise and then also catching up to other organizations more on the infrastructure side.
Yeah, so there were also some changes on the roster, and they were also made with an eye toward even more youth and really restarting a rebuild, perhaps. And Mackenzie Gore, the trade of Gore to Texas, was the headline move, and that was not unexpected. Of course, it had been rumored for years that he might be dealt, but it was kind of it was maybe depressing to Nationals fans on some level, even if they expected it, just because he was supposed to be one of the guys who would be a building block for the next great Nationals team and was part of the proceeds for the Juan Soto trade, which in isolation worked out fantastically well for Mike Rizzo and the Nats, and the return they got was great, but there wasn't much talent surrounding it. So when you're taking a trade like that that's supposed to jumpstart a rebuild, and then you're dealing one of the guys you got from that trade, well, it seems like a setback. And I guess on some level it is, but was it necessary? Did they need to turn that page? And what does that say about the team's timeline to contention?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a perfect microcosm for where the organization is at right now. You can just find within that trade. I mean, first and foremost, yes, it's depressing to the fans. It's extra depressing when you add on the layer that this was supposed to be a guy who was going to be front line for the next great Nats organization, and they never won more than 71 games while he was on the roster. But yeah, it was absolutely necessary. When I think about where this organization lacked, and you touched on it a little bit, it all goes back to the depth they had. You had James Wood at the top of the roster. You had Mackenzie Gore, who maybe not an ace yet, but could figure it out. CJ Abrams has been a great player. You have some of those linchpins at the top of the roster, but when you think about 10 through 26, they just weren't where other organizations and great organizations needed to be. And so when I think through like this package specifically, it's trading a youngish guy who maybe didn't fully reach his potential, which is like the Nationals, for 5 pieces who, Paul Taboni said, hey, if we can get 3 to 5 good big leaguers out of this, we've done our job. And so when I think about what is necessary for this organization, so much of it is rebuilding the farm system, getting the infrastructure right, but also just getting more depth in the organization. You should be at least relatively strong 5 through 9 in the lineup. You should have a handful of starters you can count on. You should have a bullpen that isn't the worst in baseball. And so when I think through what this move says, I think it says a lot about a lot. So yeah, absolutely necessary and hard pill to swallow, but one that they had to do.
Well, and it's an interesting trade in contrast to, say, their acquisition of Harry Ford. You noted that the guys that they got back for Gore, a lot of those guys are, they're far from the majors, or they're risky. They have variance in a way that could be very positive for the Nationals, but also presents risk. And then you have this move to get Ford, who obviously is big league ready right now, just had the misfortune of being blocked by Cal Raleigh. So how are they thinking about balancing sort of the needs of putting a baseball team on the field this season and in the next couple with this longer term rebuild? Because, Harry Ford might be, cresting free agency by the time they're good again if things take a while. So how are they thinking through those sort of varying timelines?
They certainly hope not. And I think when you think about either the moves that they've made or think about making, a lot of it signals that this year and the following season aren't necessarily primed to be in playoff position. But I think a lot of what they're thinking and hoping hinges on sort of the 2028 and beyond sort of window where, again, like if Harry Ford is an above average catcher or a fantastic backup, you're in a good spot. they have so many of their top prospects are 2027, 2028 guys who aren't necessarily going to come up within the next, 6 months or whatever. And so when they are kind of constructing their timeline, so much of it is, hey, let's get the processes in place. Let's make sure we're tracking everything. Let's make sure we're making smart decisions as an organization. And let's not rush anyone. I think that was kind of another pitfall of the former iteration of the organization was you had guys, Dylan Cruz, Brady House, who had a lot of potential, but, it's been a bit stifled in the major leagues. And I think, honestly, not really through the fault of their own. I think they were coming up at 21, 22 without a ton of plate appearances in the minor leagues. And you've kind of seen that at the major league level. And so I think a big thing with this org is, hey, let's not rush anything. Let's make sure that we have all of our, tech and all of our coaches in place and make sure we're all rowing in the same direction and then figure it out from there. So I understand that that's super depressing to hear if you're a Nationals fan and you haven't seen anything since 2019. And I frankly don't fault them in the slightest. The only spin I would put that on that and the way that I've been thinking about it is, hey, you maybe could have gone and pushed all your chips in and, maybe won 78, 80 games this year, but you would have been stuck where you were before. So I think trying to set it up for 2028 through 2038 is kind of the way that they're thinking through it.
And along with the other guys you named who failed to launch, you could possibly lump in Keibert Ruiz, who has been in the big leagues at least, and so is established in that sense, but hasn't been above replacement level since 2022. And if he hadn't stagnated or, let's be honest, declined, then maybe you don't want or need Harry Ford. So that's sort of emblematic of what happened to this failed rebuild in that he was a perennial top prospect for several springs, and he was also just one of the headliners that they got back in the Scherzer-Turner trade along with Josiah Gray. And look how that's panned out. So what has happened to Keibert here? How has he gone so south, not only defensively in terms of the framing stats, but also offensively? It's been rough for the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it's a mix of things. We talk to him all the time about the same sorts of issues, which is, again, the chasing, the receiving. And it's not as though he's not trying to get better. I think that that's something when you're on the outside looking in, you wonder how on earth this could happen. I don't think it's through a lack of effort, but it is kind of a case where either it wasn't the right instruction necessarily that he needed, or they just didn't really have a plan in place. I think if you talk to people around baseball, they did kind of question the Nationals' defensive and specifically catcher defense throughout the past handful of years. And Keibert has obviously kind of been the face of that, where he hasn't gotten better at the receiving end of the game in particular. And, all the one knee down stuff. We actually wrote a story last year. It was more about their minor league side, but, there had been a mandate in the organization to not drop to the more modern catching stance while guys were on base. And that's something that just does not happen in other organizations. Hopefully they brought in Bobby Wilson as a catching coordinator. They hope that he helps him there. And then on the offensive side, it really was just a matter of he chases more than almost anyone else in baseball. He has a slow swing and, he would get in short grooves where he could really do a lot of damage, but, he didn't walk and he didn't hit homers after the first few games of the season. Couple that with he had multiple concussions last year, which was kind of sad and really kind of set him on a down note ending the season. So yeah, again, it's just kind of all these things where it's like, God, you wonder what could have happened if he had different coaching over the last handful of years, or maybe had different instruction or took different cues in different ways. And I think that's what's really encouraging about what has been added over the past 6 months. The only question for a guy like Keibert is it too late in his developmental arc to fix some of these things?
We keep bringing Nats fans low. Let's bring them high. And that isn't just a joke about how tall James Wood is, but it isn't not a joke about how tall James Wood is. High, because he's 6'6". On a team where offense was a little thin on the ground, he certainly provided some in his sophomore season. He was a 3-win player. I'm curious sort of what the next developmental goal for him is, and I'm sorry that we're going to keep asking this question, but like, where do they see him fitting in from a long-term perspective? Is Wood someone they expect to be on the team and productive when the next good Nationals core is on the field, or do you imagine it might take longer than that?
James Wood is the one guy where I look at him during his best stretches and say that guy could be an MVP candidate in the next 2 years. And so I do think he's part of their next competitive window if they nail this as they're hoping to. He gave so many great moments in 2025 that I think that, we didn't even fully appreciate in the moment. He had, moments where it was like, ending the 11th game win streak on a walk-off homer and things like that. But it was really just the consistency in the first half of, hey, this is a guy who hits homers. They haven't had that in a while. Or this is a guy who has probably the best plate discipline on the team when things are going right. And again, not to get too in the negatives, obviously you saw some of that dissipate in the second half, but this is a guy where when he puts it all together, the opposite field power, just the talent, and frankly, I mean, the work ethic, like it's all exactly what you expect from a guy who could be an MVP candidate one day. So he was someone that was obviously a big boost last year, and the problem was they just didn't have enough of him. So yeah, he's someone where I think he fits into their short-term and their long-term plans. I know Nats fans are wary after trading Soto and trading the return to Juan Soto, or at least starting to do it with, the prospect of trading James Wood one day. I frankly wouldn't worry about that. I to be blunt, I trust the infrastructure that's there right now. And I think James is a guy who can be part of the next Nationals team that makes the playoffs or beyond.
I was wondering if Meg was going for some sort of joke about how he should hit the ball higher too and also get the ball off the ground. Do they think that he can succeed with this current batted ball profile, or are they still hoping to reshape that somewhat? Because obviously he came, 2 strikeouts short of Mark Reynolds' single season record. So he strikes out a lot, and he had a 39% strikeout rate after the All-Star break. Not ideal. It was working, though, early in the season, even when he wasn't really getting the ball elevated all that often, just because he does have such incredible power and hits the ball so hard and could just go out oppo with some regularity. So are they thinking if we can just get him to make more contact, it's okay if he still hits the ball on the ground a fair amount and goes the opposite way? Or do they and he still want to change that as well?
I think it's a yes and no sort of answer, and that's a bit of a cop-out. But when you think about who James is as a player, say you take that first half and you don't change anything, that's a 5.5, a 6 WAR player. Yeah, he hits the ball on the ground a lot, but you really risk messing up his swing and messing up where he was at if you do try to tinker too much. I don't want to say they tried to tap into some pull side power, but you saw a little bit of that in the second half that I think was partially responsible for some of the timing and some of the results. And so I think that if there was one tweak that they're potentially able to make with his bat path, where you don't completely mess up his swing, but you also get it so he's lifting the ball a little bit more, I understand it. But I just don't think you need to make wholesale changes with that guy when he is hitting the ball, 115 miles per hour all the time. I just think that you can live with some of those, grounders and hope for the best. Just to speak to kind of the larger issue here, that all the Nationals hit the ball on the ground too much. And so maybe you're not making wholesale changes with James Wood, but maybe you're doing it with some of the other guys on the roster who are maybe less of a finished product, or maybe can, improve their game in leaps and bounds by lifting the ball a little bit more. So they aren't trying to not do that with anyone, but with James, I think they'll definitely be careful.
And I guess one of the candidates for an approach change in that regard might be Dylan Cruz. I don't want to knock him too hard for his 2025, just given that he dealt with injury. But talk to us about how the Dylan Cruz experience has gone so far, because obviously this guy was highly lauded as a prospect and it just hasn't quite come together for him. So what are they sort of giving to him as developmental goals for 2026, and how likely do you think he is to be able to achieve them?
Yeah, I think the biggest message, and it's a bit of a cliche with Dylan in 2026, is just be yourself. And I'll unpack that a lot more because that's not an interesting answer. The way that I would put it is, this was a guy who in college, one of the real hallmarks of his game was the hit tool and was the reliability of the hit tool. The whiff has been there and the chase has been there. And I think, honestly, for him to have a successful 2026 at the plate, he needs to fix one of those. I don't necessarily know how easy it would be to fix both. Because I think that when you talk about approach and you talk about swing and you talk about all these things, it's hard to kind of fix all those things at once. But I think if he can really nail down one of those where he says, hey, let me get back to the approach I had in college, or, hey, let me get back to the swing I had, back when things were going really well at LSU, that's the sort of thing where I say, hey, if he can do one of those, he'll be in a good spot. The fielding has been there. The base running has largely been there. He's someone who has taken on more of a vocal role in the clubhouse, even as a 23-year-old or whatever he is these days, which is a bit absurd. But yeah, he's someone he's put those parts of his game together, but it just hasn't been consistent at the plate, whether it's, again, like at times it's just not being able to hit the breaking ball. And then once he figures that out, sometimes it's, all of a sudden, like the fastball down the middle, he can't get to as much as he'd want to. He's another guy where I'd like to see a little more pull side power reliably, without changing his swing too much. So it's just a whole bunch of things where he is really the test case when I look at this new coaching staff, where I say, if he has a successful 2026, that means other things have gone really, really right. And so that's one that I'm really looking at heading into the year.
Cruz just turned 24, positively ancient, but still 22 is Brady House, the other guy you lumped together with Cruz. Also a first rounder, not quite as highly lauded a prospect, but certainly up there. And his first crack at the major league level didn't go great last year. So what's the outlook for him?
Yeah, he's someone, and the comment that always comes into my mind is from interim manager Miguel Cairo last year, who pretty bluntly, when he was talking about Brady throughout the year, but at one point was just kind of said, hey, he's got to pick one side of the plate to swing at and just ignore the other one. So I think a lot of what you saw with Brady was just the adjustment to big league pitching and maybe not necessarily having the most consistent approach up there. And so that's where you saw the decline in power. You saw the decline in contact, where he really thrived at AAA and just maybe wasn't able to make that adjustment, or wasn't able to have the coaches help him with that adjustment as much as he had hoped to. So he's someone where in 2026, again, a big thing I'm looking at is how much he's chasing and how much he's really able to kind of control himself at the plate. Because, again, he had a great stint in the minor leagues, but he got to the majors at 21 as an unfinished product, where, again, like the Pirates are probably about to call up Connor Griffin. That's a guy who really seems to have put it all together, and I don't think Brady necessarily had done it when they called him up. So yeah, he's one where I wouldn't, put a ton of expectations on him. I also, this is more speculation than anything else, but if he needed to have a stint back in the minor leagues to maybe work on some things, like, I don't think that's the worst thing for him. So they don't really have a long-term answer at third base outside of him, but I am curious to see how they figure that out, because he's definitely not a finished product in the way that, maybe James Wood is.
Yeah, though it does seem somewhat exploitable if you announced beforehand that you would be swinging only at pitches on one side of the plate, and it was the same side of the plate, if that didn't vary from one pitch to the next. It seems like the book would be out on that pretty quick.
Yeah, maybe not the best piece of advice I've ever heard, but, that's among 1,000 different interactions, so I'll give the benefit of the doubt on that one.
Yeah.
It feels a little unfair to ask, how sustainable is Dalen Lyles 2025? Because, he had a 132 WRC plus in 91 plate appearances. The less said about his defense, the better. But I think he was sort of a silver lining, a breath of fresh air for Nationals fans last year when the team was really floundering and it didn't look like things were going great. How sustainable is his performance? And were there things that you saw where you thought, well, maybe he's not going to hit quite like this, but there's an approach here that he might be able to lean on when big league pitchers make an adjustment back to him?
I think the three best hitters last September by WRC plus, if I'm remembering correctly, were Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, and Dalen Lyles. So yeah. I don't exactly know how sustainable that is. But what I will say, and why I have a lot of hope in his future, is it's not just what he did in those 91 games. It's, the calls with scouts or people in the front office or, guys close to him where, he was probably like the 9th or 10th ranked Nats prospect when he came up. You will never hear one of those people who have been around him say, this guy isn't going to work out. I think the trust in the hit tool is so high, and I think you saw that last year, where he has a floor of being an everyday major leaguer, we'll say at the plate, because, again, the fields definitely needed some work. But, yeah, he's a guy where all he does is hit line drives in a way that does feel more sustainable and sticky than you'd get with maybe some other guys in a 91 game sample, just because, again, of the bat path and the reliability of the hit tool. He's someone who has a ton of speed, and so even if he does hit the ball on the ground at some time more than you'd want him to, or he doesn't make flush contact, he's someone who can beat a lot out. I think he tied the Nationals rookie triples record last year, and the only reason he didn't break it is because he had an inside the park home run late in the season where I think he had considered maybe stopping at third base, but decided, hey, I'm going to try to win the Nats the game at the moment. So he's a funny guy. But yeah, he's someone where I do have, I don't know if it's James Wood level upside, but I think it's way more than people, at least on the outside, kind of expected. That's a guy where, again, I kind of pencil in, again, I hate to put WAR because the defense isn't quite there yet, but I basically pencil in a 2.5 win absolute floor with that guy, with the potential to be a lot better. Yeah, that's kind of what I saw from him at the plate and then the field. Obviously need work, but that's something that he's worked a lot on over the last few months.
C.J. Abrams is another enigma. At times it seemed like he might be on the verge of stardom. At other times he's been demoted after doing an all-nighter at a casino. So it's been really some highs and lows. And he had almost identical offensive seasons in 2024 and 2025. It's not exactly Chris Davis batting .247, but just like across the board, almost all the stats are virtually identical, but it was a better year. He played a few more games. The defense was a bit better. He stole the same number of bases, but got caught a lot less often. So there were improvements here. He's still only 25. Is he the next guy who is going to follow Mackenzie Gore, both being in the Juan Soto trade and also being shipped out of town, or do they want to keep him around?
Yeah, I don't think it's a guarantee that he gets traded, but I would say, gun to my head, I think he will at the deadline. He's one where I think the reason they haven't necessarily traded him yet is because the gap between how they value him and the gap how everyone else values him is relatively wide. I say that James Wood is an MVP caliber player. I think the Nationals say, hey, at C.J. Abrams' ceiling, if you look at the best 3-month stretches of his career, that's also an MVP caliber player. Someone with power, speed. When he's locked in defensively, really high upside, but look at any number that will tell you that he just hasn't gotten there yet. And so I think that he's someone where I would think it's pretty likely that he's traded, but you want to give him an extra 3 months with a new coaching staff and really see how high that ceiling can go. He's someone where I think that there are a handful of teams around the league, just from speaking with some people that view him as a shortstop. There are a lot of teams that also view him as a second baseman or as an outfielder. So if he can prove that he's great defensively for 3 months, if he can do basically what he's done in the past couple of first halves or even better, that's someone where you look at maybe the prize of the deadline. He's the kind of guy that could be. Again, I don't necessarily think it's an absolute guarantee that he gets traded, but with 3 years left, you'd really have to be super confident about, frankly, a 2027 season that we don't even know is what it's going to look like yet, that you're able to make all those improvements really quickly. And I frankly just don't think they're going to get there yet, but maybe something has changed in the last 24 hours that I haven't heard about.
We talked about how they have guys, this is a young team and, there's more down on the farm. If there's injury, if there's underperformance, are there guys sort of floating around the high minors who strike you as likely to see big league time this year?
Frankly, not a ton, just because so much of their talent is either injured or in the lower levels of the minors. I think
those pitchers, man.
Yeah. So like Luis Perales is probably the best bet where, maybe after the deadline, he makes, 12, 15 starts or maybe even earlier and really just blows the lid off this thing because, again, they acquired him this winter from Taboni's old team. And he's a guy with tons of stuff. I guess he's the main guy. And I don't want to close the door on Susana making his debut this year just because, again, if everything clicks right, with his return to the field, that's a guy who could instantly be, I don't want to say he would be the best starter on the Nationals right away, but that sort of potential, if they do see him in the starting rotation. But again, I'm just wary that they're going to be uber conservative with rushing any of these guys after some of the mistakes of years past. And maybe Susana. I really like Christian Franklin who's an outfielder that they acquired at the deadline last year. Sam Peterson's I think a 7th or 8th round guy who's popped up, also an outfielder, but it's a crowded outfield. I like Abby Ortiz, who's kind of the power hitting, lottery ticket they got from the Mackenzie Gore package. He might even make the opening day roster, but if I see him as more of a AAA guy. So there's a handful of guys, but it really is like 2 years from now getting some of the other guys in, or 3 years from now the Eli Willits of the world.
Well, I believe it was reported this week that Cade Cavalli is expected to get the opening day start for the Nationals. Speaking of guys Nationals fans have been waiting for a while, and another injured guy. So they did get glimpses of him. He made 10 starts for the big league club last year. What is still left of what he was as a prospect? How excited should people be relative to how excited they were a few years ago?
I don't want to say equally excited, but again, probably the guy I am most bullish on compared to just general expectations league-wide. He's still throwing 97, getting up to 99. He still has unreal break on basically any pitch that matters. The command wasn't there last year, and I don't want to say the pitch mix, but the sequencing, I talked to him a handful of times at the end of last year, was not where he wanted it to be because he was still figuring out what his arsenal looked like after the injury. And so he's someone where I look instantly at the stuff and say, this is not someone who I see every day. It's not, is it an ace of an organization? I'm not sure, but I think that guy can be a number 2 on a really good team. And that's obviously not something the Nationals have elsewhere in their starting rotation. So yeah, I'm very high on him. I think he's someone where if he figures out that sequencing side of things and the mental side, not to say that he isn't locked in, but he's still figuring it out. That's a guy I'm super high on in 2026. The rest of the rotation is a lot of question marks and some guys who definitely have a decent floor, but the ceiling isn't what you'd find from 3s and 4s elsewhere in the league. But yeah, Cade is a guy I'm all in on, and someone just, again, from talking to him, a couple times a week during the season, someone who I feel is really ready to take that next step and put all the arm injuries in the past and is kind of ready to be that guy for the team when they desperately need it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the rest of the rotation because you're right. It seems like they have a lot of number 5 starters on their roster and maybe not guys to fill in the gaps, but tell us about the rest of that group. Obviously, they supplemented it again this week with Zach Littell.
Former Effectively Wild guest.
Yeah, but they brought in Miles Michaelis and Foster Griffin, and then, Jake Irvin and Brad Lord are floating around. So tell us about the rest of that group.
Yeah, I think what the Nationals have this year that they maybe haven't had in the first 2 years I've covered them is that sort of reliable depth of guys who have already done it and shown something in the past. Michaelis, I haven't gotten to meet him yet, so I'm still not entirely sure. I can't speak to exactly what those conversations have looked like between him and the team, but it's a lot of Miles Michaelis, you basically know what you're going to get. I think Zach Littell, more or less, you know what you're going to get. Foster Griffin is a fun case of a guy who throws a ton of pitches, and so you can talk yourself into, hey, is this guy's Seth Lugo, or is he, maybe the best version of Eric Fetty, another guy who the Nationals got rid of in years past. Jake Irvin is a guy who, again, has shown it for 3 or 4 months at a time, but the velocity, when the velocity isn't there, he really struggles. Brad Lord is a guy who's bounced between the starting rotation and the bullpen. So it's one guy after another where it's, hey, we've seen 2 or 3 great stretches from you, stretches where you look like maybe a number 4 in a good rotation. But it isn't necessarily the stuff that you expect from guys league-wide where you think about Paul Taboni's old team with the Red Sox. They have so much pitching depth, and it comes from a lot of guys who throw at weird angles, who fill up the zone, who are nasty, and the Nationals just didn't necessarily have that. So that's kind of the individual looks at each of them. I'd say the even more important thing that I think about is just exactly what types of pitches these guys are throwing. I think, in the past 3, 4, 5 years, the Nationals have just told guys to hammer the zone with fastballs, throw your fastball as much as possible, establish it, kind of that old school way of thinking, and kind of figure it out from there. You look early in spring training at what the Nationals have done, and you look at Paul Taboni's old team with the Red Sox. Those guys never throw fastballs, and they're not throwing fastballs right now. So I think hammering some of the secondary stuff, both is really fun to think about and consider as someone who's seen so many fastballs over the last couple of years, but also I think really encouraging for some of these young guys where, hey, maybe he's not the ace of future staff, but if his curveball is the best thing that we've got, or if he's got some sort of nasty slider or changeup that he's only been throwing 15% of the time and now he's throwing it 50% of the time, that's really, I don't know. It's fun to think about where this team could go and where some of these guys could go, even if it's not a 3 ERA, maybe it's a 4 ERA where before they were in the mid 5s. So, it's a lot to think about with those guys.
Yeah, that leads into something I wanted to ask during the Cardinals preview. We talked about how the Cardinals and the Nationals were similarly averse to strikeouts, their pitchers, that is, that only the Rockies in cores, of course, had fewer strikeouts than those two teams. And Derek Gould, our Cardinals guest, was talking about how the Cardinals are bound and determined to change that, and that's a big emphasis for them. And I assume that with the Nationals, it's also a bit of a stylistic thing, that they were more pitch to contact, and Mike Rizzo had his "I don't care how fast you throw ball 4" mantra, and you just talked about the fastball heavy approach. At least the Cardinals, in addition to their pitching to contact, they had health going for them. At least their guys didn't miss many bats, but also didn't miss many starts. I don't know that you could say that about the Nationals either, so it was worst of both worlds maybe. But how much of that was just purely the personnel, just not a very good team, didn't have great stuff, and how much of it was actually sort of figuratively tying a hand behind their back?
I'd say it was about 50-50. In the sense that, like, again, they had the "I don't care how fast you throw ball 4" signs. That shows up in in-game strategy and player development. It also shows up in the types of guys that you get. You know, even look at the deadline last year, once Mike Rizzo left and Mike DiBartolo stepped in. You look at the fastball grades or the slider grades on any of those guys who came in, or the fastball velocity. They were honestly exceptional numbers, and a lot of those guys didn't have the command, so they were throwing a lot of hard ball 4s. So yeah, I think a big piece of it is the kind of talent acquisition, but so much of it, and if you talk to anyone in the organization, they'll tell you this, is kind of the player development and the tracking side of things, where, hey, if something didn't work necessarily in the past, you just kind of went back to the way things were. Where I think really the big goal with this year and the upcoming years is, hey, we're going to track everything. We're going to track ourselves. We're going to track how fast you're throwing. We're going to track injuries. We're going to track every single thing that we can to try to get some of those variables consistent and say, hey, we all of a sudden know how to develop these guys who can strike guys out. Where in the past, it was, hey, try to do your best stuff. But if things don't work, just kind of stick to what you were doing before. And a lot of those guys didn't necessarily, going back to the player evaluation and the talent acquisition piece, didn't necessarily have the stuff that you'd expect from a frontline big league starter. So I hate to say it, it was kind of broken on both fronts from an acquisition and from a development standpoint. And it seems like now they're really trying to fix it. And that's maybe the other big thing I'm thinking about heading into this season is some of these changes, frankly, just are going to take time. But stuff is one that generally can be improved relatively quickly. And so especially at the minor league level, but even in the majors, if a handful of these guys have real big stuff numbers that track way up, that tells me that they've had a good 2026 and will have a good 2027 and beyond.
I suppose we should talk about the bullpen a little bit. Hopefully they'll be, well, you never know. Hopefully they'll be handing leads to these guys. Who are those guys? Which guys will they be handing the leads?
More than one lead. They only need 2 leads to qualify as leads, so I think that's safe to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be too down on them, but walk us through this bullpen group.
For a national audience, you probably have not heard either of these names, which usually isn't the case for a closer. Clayton Beeter, who they got at the deadline last year, is effectively a 2-pitch guy with a ton of stuff and not a ton of command. So he does throw ball forward really, really hard, but frankly did it really, really well when he came over at the deadline last year. And then Cole Henry's the other setup guy, where he was a LSU starter back in the day, went through some injuries, had TOS, which set him back for a couple of years, but really was encouraging for large stretches of 2025 and stayed healthy. So those are 2 guys that I see as stalwarts, and I see as, hey, even if they're unfinished products, they are guys that you can bank on. Beyond that, it's a ton of question marks. So yeah, I think the bullpen will be better this year, but I don't necessarily know how many reliable names will be in there.
It's funny when you say TOS, my mind goes to terms of service. And I was trying to, he had terms of service? No, thoracic outlet syndrome, of course. And once you hear the name Clayton Beeter, even if you haven't heard it before, it's hard to forget. So it does stick in your mind. So the guy who will be making those calls to the bullpen and also presumably figuring out, say, who plays first base and who plays outfield, etc., is Blake Butera. And he's the new skipper. He is replacing former interim manager Miguel Cairo. And Cairo is kind of eternally in his early 30s in my mind, because when I was a teenager watching him in New York, that's how old he was. That's not how old he is now, or I am for that matter. He's a man in his 50s, but Blake Butera is still in his early 30s. He's 33. And I think the only player on the roster who is older than Butera is Miles Mikolas, right? And unless maybe Trevor Williams comes back from internal brace surgery at some point this season. So I guess he almost has seniority by default, even as a rookie without a ton of managerial experience. But tell us a little bit, as far as you've been able to glean, about Butera and what it was about him that made the Nationals choose him.
Yeah, obviously the headline is very young, but the Nationals are doing that elsewhere. So really what has been compelling throughout both the hiring process with him and the months that have followed is how much he can relate to players and basically implement and help lead, everything that they are trying to do at every level. He was with the Rays previously as their head of player development. And I think the Nationals, part of why they see Blake as this guy to usher them into the new era is because he can speak that language and he doesn't think that player development stops at the major league level in a way that the Nationals of past, you didn't see a lot of player development at the major league level. So they really trust him to be able to implement a lot of the more eccentric or newer age ideas that are coming in to the organization in a super new way. He's also, again, talking to people that he's worked with in the past or people that know him decently well or people that have had one conversation. The phrase that's been thrown around a couple of times is 80 great human, in the sense that he's a really good connector. I do think that there will be a bit of an adjustment at the major league level with him in terms of there are going to be hard conversations he hasn't necessarily had to have before, and there will be new challenges that you just don't get when you're the head of player development. But I do think a lot of people in the organization see this as the guy and someone that they're really happy that they landed on. So even if these challenges are new, they see him as someone who, come May or come June, he's figured a lot of those things out. So he'll be learning on the fly. A lot of people will be learning on the fly. But I've frankly yet to hear a bad word about him, not through a lack of sourcing. So he's someone where I think that they made the right hire, but there will be a handful of things that he'll definitely have to adjust to in the early going.
Yeah, I guess he's got a little bit of that A.J. Hinch background with the developmental experience, front office experience, and now managing, though without the major league playing experience and hopefully without the inability to stop sign stealing experience. And unrelated, I keep having to remind myself, to the other Buteras, the established big league Butera bloodline, not related to Drew, who is related to Sal, who was his father, but neither of them, related to Blake. So now that we have that straight, we can get to our closing question, which is what would constitute success for the Nationals this season? And I'm guessing your answer is not going to be win the World Series or even win the division or make the playoffs. So how do you gauge success for a team like this?
Yeah, it's not even going to use the word win, which I don't think is probably something you can say for, most of the people that you've talked to. For me, it's can they make real improvements in some of the areas where they stunk? I think that's kind of the plainest way to say it. I don't think that this team is going to show up in the standings in any sort of way that's positive. But I do think it's, hey, are they going to stop throwing fastballs and have their secondaries work? Are they not going to be the worst framing team in baseball? Are they going to stop hitting so many grounders? Is the stuff going to tick up? It's all these goals where it's really process and player development oriented, and less so about, hey, can we eke out a win here? Or can we do this here? It's all of those kind of process and evaluative goals, and less so about, hey, we're going to win 100 games this year. And again, that'll be tough for Nationals fans to swallow. At times it will be tough to watch, but there's just so much that needed to get cleaned up within the organization, both in the major and minor league level. And so it's making sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction and doing those things that new age organizations do. I apologize to Nationals fans that wanted to see 80 wins this year. I wouldn't bank on it, but I would say that there's still a lot of compelling pieces and compelling trends that hopefully I will be tracking over at The Athletic.
All right. Well, we have been speaking to Spencer Nussbaum, formerly of the Washington Post, newly or about to be of The Athletic, still has that shiny new fresh beat writer smell. Not that any beat writer doesn't smell good. I'm not suggesting that from personal experience, but we congratulate you on the new gig and we look forward to you getting started over there. Thank you, Spencer.
Thank you. That's the best outro I've ever gotten.
All right. I mentioned at the top of the pod that Team USA and Team Italy were both undefeated in the WBC, but something had to give because they played each other on Tuesday. And Italy triumphed. The team of former Ringer MLB show guest Michael Lorenzen and former Effectively Wild guest Vinny Pasquantino topped Team USA 8-6. Took an 8-0 lead in a late comeback by Team USA. Could not quite overcome that margin. Not the greatest start for the US by Nolan McLean, whom we discussed on the Mets segment. So now Team USA on the brink of being knocked out of the knockout stage. They now have to root for Team Italy on Wednesday to beat Mexico. And if Team Italy wins again, then the US will advance. If Mexico wins, then it comes down to a 3-way tiebreaker based on runs allowed, and the two teams that have allowed the fewest runs would advance. So another former guest of ours, Louis Paulus, broke it down on Blue Sky. Italy wins, Italy and the US advance. Mexico wins and scores 6 or more runs, Mexico and the US advance. Mexico wins and scores fewer than 5 runs, Mexico and Italy advance. If Mexico wins and scores exactly 5 runs, Mexico advances, and the last spot comes down to other things. Then it gets complicated. That's the tiebreak for Sicko's scenario. Or he added, in terms of what each team needs in a 9-inning game, Italy advances with a win or a loss while allowing fewer than 5 runs. Mexico advances with a win. The U.S. advances if Italy wins or Mexico scores 6+ runs. If Mexico wins while scoring exactly 5, Italy-USA comes down to how many of those runs are earned, and then potentially how many runs Italy scores. If Mexico wins in extras, or via mercy rule, or even without having to bat in the bottom of the 9th, that also changes the decision tree logic for Italy and USA getting the other spot. So, a serious, exciting upset, and we will discuss how this round turns out next time. If you'd like a little more me yakking about baseball elsewhere, I appeared on friend of the show Ellen Adair's podcast, Take Me Into the Ball Game. She talks about baseball movies and shows, and she had me on to talk about Charlie Brown's All-Stars, the second Peanuts animated special. If you want to hear me talking for 2 hours about baseball and Peanuts and my love of both, please do tune in. Ellen, of course, in addition to being a rabid Phillies fan, is an accomplished actor and brilliantly used her voice to bring Ella Black to life in our 3-part Effectively Wild docuseries last year. By the way, we talked about Joe Sewell, the king of contact of the 1920s and 30s, and his seemingly indestructible bat, Black Betsy. I meant to credit the source. That story I was reading came from Craig R. Wright, not Allwright, R. Wright, whom I have mentioned many times in the past for his previous subscription newsletter called Pages from Baseball's Past, which ended and went on hiatus for a while and is now back and is on Substack. So I will link to that. He is recycling many of his previous stories and also writing some new ones. I always learn a lot from Craig's work. He is an accomplished historian and also was the first person to hold the title of sabermetrician for an MLB team back in the 80s. Had a long career in baseball, was a real trailblazer in that respect. The thing about bats versus guitars is guitars tend to take a little less abuse unless you're Pete Townsend and you're smashing stuff for effect. Also, follow-up message from Brad, Patreon supporter, who says, I was just listening to episode 2449 when you were talking about teams starting so early in the day during spring training. This was something that former team executive Andrew Ball wrote about in his newsletter, that teams don't have to report as early in the day as they do in spring training, but everyone just does it out of inertia or not wanting to look any less serious about preparing for the season. Well, Brad says it reminded me of this MLB Network interview I saw with Warren Schaefer talking about how the Rockies are changing things up this year and not starting early. So let me play a brief clip now of the Rockies skipper.
Talking about a new regime, new coaches, and a new camp. Tell me how you guys are doing things differently. Specifically, is it just what time the guys are meeting, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. It's a 180-degree shift in terms of the way this camp is run. I mean, the mornings are theirs. We don't like to do things in the morning a lot to get the rest and recovery in. Hitting in the cage at 7:30 in the morning, I don't think is good for success. You're not rolled out. You don't have your coffee yet. So we're starting later.
Well, kudos to Warren and kudos to the Rockies. And how often do we get to say that? And I guess that's the perfect team to try to shake things up, because what they were doing before was not working so well. And they kind of can't go anywhere but up, even if they don't get up until later. Sometimes that gives you cover to experiment. Also, when we were doing that Nats preview, I meant to give an on-air congratulations to our pal, RJ Anderson, late of CBS Sports, who is the newest or one of the newest members of the Nationals front office. RJ's been with Baseball Prospectus and with FanGraphs. We've been friends for years and sometimes colleagues. Great guy, smart hire by the Nats. We will miss him in the public sphere. He is, I believe, an 8-time Effectively Wild guest, so maybe he can help turn things around in DC. He's got a good eye for talent, which we know because the last time he appeared on this podcast was on episode 2295, which was a year ago this week. And I brought him on because he was one of the only podcast-approved breakout candidate pickers. He always picked breakout candidates the way that I think it should be done, finding real diamonds in the rough, not selecting top prospects or guys who were good last year, but maybe not for a full season or no one noticed or something. I will very much miss him on the breakouts beat, though I guess picking breakouts might still be his job. It's just that the Nats will be the only ones who benefit from that insight. And speaking of the breakouts beat, I'm mostly off it these days. I have largely retired from ranting about breakouts. I've made my point. I can't promise that I'll never uncork another complaint about a bad breakout pick, but I tend to avoid the breakout articles where I know what I'm going to get and I know that I will heave a heavy sigh. So why subject myself to that? And I'm glad to see that my hectoring has had an influence, because not for the first time, another national writer has steered away from using the term breakout out of apprehension about how I might react. This is Zach Kreiser writing for The Bandwagon. Most recent edition says, bandwagon pre-boarding, picking MLB players to make the leap in 2026. And he writes, today I've got part 1 of what I'm calling bandwagon pre-boarding. Am I using that term to avoid the wrath of Effectively Wild co-host and much appreciated reader Ben Lindbergh over the term breakout player? Maybe. Am I trying to draw a distinction between the effort I'm undertaking and the more front office employee style, more difficult art of scouting for true diamonds in the rough? Also, yes. I will take it, Zach. Thank you. Very much appreciated. And I'm glad to see that even if I'm toning down the rhetoric a tad, my legacy will live on. Fear will keep the local writers in line. Fear of this podcast. Anytime you can comp yourself to Grand Moff Tarkin, you gotta do it. You also gotta, or at least might wanna, support the podcast on Patreon by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks. As have the following 5 listeners: Dan, Lucas Hager, Joseph Durantini, Violet Brown, and Sean Ferrante. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, monthly bonus episodes, playoff live streams, prioritized email answers, personalized messages, shoutouts at the end of episodes, potential podcast appearances, discounts on merch, and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we've cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. Back with more previews a little later this week. Talk to you then.
Effectively Wild.